Chapter 1025 Random Anomalies. The full-body mirror's silver words seemed to have a life of their own as they vanished and reformed. The Concerto of Light and Shadow is a pocket watch. It can restrict certain actions in a particular area, and it can also strip certain beyonder powers from the target. When the two are put together, the limitations that are created far exceed the two types. The Concerto of Light and Shadow is also able to gift certain negative side effects to the target, making him sluggish, eager, avaricious, or lose their fighting spirit, only capable of focusing his attention on money. Apart from these effects, the sealed artifact's wielder would have the ability to distort the target's speech, actions, intentions, and attacks. It can reduce a lethal blow into a serious injury, or it could repel an attack, turning progression into retrogression, escaping into leading a charge. The negative effects of Concerto of Light and Shadow are rather serious. Amongst them, the main negative effect to take note of is that once it's brought into combat, all the beyonder effects produced in a certain region would intermittently experience random anomalies. It wouldn't distinguish between friend or foe, making it hard to control and unpredictable. That also means that lightning strike might still create a bolt of lightning, but it might splash the target with a blast of cold water, or summon unknown spirit world creatures. Due to this reason, Kona's Kilgore has deliberately sought out a mystical item that can make him sufficiently lucky at critical moments, hoping that the random intermittent effects will benefit himself. It's definitely useful to a certain extent, but it's not that great. Kona's Kilgore also has a strange revolver. It originated from an anomaly during an evil god's sacrifice. It's called Rever's Shout of Despair. It can shoot without bullets, and each shot possesses immense strength. It can shoot at a rapid pace like a miniature machine gun. Targets who are hit by it will suffer Rever's Shout of Despair before he died. They will suffer different levels of pain, dizziness, and confusion. The biggest problem with the revolver is that the wielder will also hear the shout of despair. It just won't be too frequent. As an Earl of the Fallen, Kona's Kilgore no doubt has a qualitative change when it comes to distortion and the unreasonable bestowment. In addition, he can also exploit laws and magnify effects, and use disorder to disrupt order. Exploit can extend certain states for longer periods of time, or end it ahead of time. It will make the rules more beneficial to himself. For example, after jumping into midair, the state of being away from the ground can be extended, achieving the effect of floating. Magnify can boost the effects or influence of his actions. It can make an ordinary attack become an execution. It can turn a hug from a distance away into a restriction. Disorder will influence the structure of objects, the standards of measurement, and the accuracy of attacks. It will make a seemingly massive building collapse, causing what seems like a huge distance to be shortened to that of a few paces, as well as allowing attacks that are aimed at him to miss their mark. Through magnify, exploit, and distortion, Beyonders of the Lawyer pathway can achieve certain things that only Beyonders of the Arbiter pathway can accomplish. Of course, low and mid-sequence Beyonder powers of the Lawyer pathway like Bribe are equally possessed by an Earl of the Fallen, and are even stronger. Great Master, I've finished answering your question. Is that okay? Your answer is like a guidebook. You must have been gathering information from the spirit world while delivering it. Also, must you seek praise even for matters such as this? Klein lampooned and nodded slightly. That's right. After answering Rhodes's question, he quickly got into the zone as he analyzed the powers and traits of the powerful sealed artifact which the demigod, Kona's Kilgore, had. An Earl of the Fallen is indeed a sequence for demigod existence. There are qualitative changes in various aspects. Be it bestowment, distortion, exploit, and magnify, none of them are easy to deal with. I might suffer if I'm careless. Rather, disorder isn't terrifying. It's basically an enhanced version of the sequence 5 Mentor of Confusion's power. The Concerto of Light and Shadow does have traits of the Arbiter domain, and the most frustrating aspect about it is the negative side effects. To a Beyonder of the Seer pathway, my combat style is definitely closer to one of preparation, precision, and control. Once the battle begins, the moves will chain one after another. During this process, if a random deviation were to happen, the entire plan can easily be messed up and not be accomplished. It's very dangerous. As he thought, Klein discovered that the main problem stemmed from the sealed artifact named Concerto of Light and Shadow. As a Beyonder who likes setting up traps for his enemy, Klein didn't wish that after throwing himself into a perilous situation through his painstaking planning and hard work, he would realize that the item would summon a rabbit just as he was using the Fate Siphon charm to switch fates with his target to turn the tables and finish off his opponent. Or perhaps it would turn into fireworks to celebrate the death of the user. Kona's Kilgore can reduce the effects by raising his luck, but I can't do it. Fortune or misfortune that's not at the angel level won't be effective on me. However, I have the marionette, Winner Anuni. Klein thought as he gave Rhodes the second question. How can the intermittent random anomalies of that sealed artifact be avoided? Silver words appeared out of the ripples of the deep mirror, forming a new sentence. There's no need to avoid it. Kona's Kilgore just needs to become unlucky, and for this the demigods of the Evernight pathway are experts. Makes sense. According to the theory of relativity, as long as Kona's Kilgore is more unlucky than me, I'll be the lucky one. Ma'am Mariana said that she can provide me with assistance. To her, secretly slipping some misfortune onto Kona's Kilgore before creating the concealed state should be very simple and easy. Klein immediately nodded cheerfully. Very good. That's it for today. I'll summon you again if there's anything else. Yes, Master. No problem, Master. Goodbye, Master Dash. On the full-body mirror's surface was a simple drawing followed by silver words. Seeing the mirror instantly return to normal, Klein retracted his gaze and quickly simulated the battle that would happen in his mind. Gradually, he came up with an idea, and grabbing onto that flash of inspiration, he proceeded forward in refining it. After having a few tentative plans, Klein walked to the balcony and looked at the garden in the night sky, whispering, "Can you inflict misfortune onto Kona's Kilgore before the battle?" After a brief silence, a calm and ordinary female voice rang in his ears. "Yes. Then it's fine on my side," Klein immediately replied. Tranquility quickly returned to his surroundings. A rather cold breeze blew by, and Klein expressionlessly stared at the manor for a few seconds. Then he pressed down on his silk hat, pulled the human skin glove on his left hand, and drew Death Knell from his underarm holster. Right on the heels of that, he flicked his thumb and made the iron-black revolver's cylinder spin. The night grew darker as the crimson moon occasionally tore through the clouds. Mager Manor was completely in a state of deep sleep. At this moment, a figure stealthily came from the Tussock River's south bank, taking 2 to 3 steps to return to his room. He was none other than the deputy director of MI9, Kona's Kilgore, who wore a white shirt and black trousers. This demigod with a stout look surveyed the area, and didn't notice any abnormalities. He gradually revealed a smile, and walked to the bar counter in the guest room. Getting a cup, he picked up a bottle of Mager red wine. He prepared to pour some for himself to celebrate the wonderful night. At this moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he looked up abruptly. He saw the buildings with a few grayish-white chimneys suddenly become covered in shadows as if they were dyed with ink. To the side of the chimneys, on one of the steeple landmarks of Mager Manor's main building, it was equally dark. The bright red moon was silently hanging behind the chimney. The clouds and stars high in the sky had vanished. Apart from the gigantic crimson moon, there was pitch-black darkness. Under the night sky, the flowers and trees were clearly in front of him, but they lacked any signs of life. They were dim, as though they were a great distance away. Black and red, shadows and buildings, and the silence and plants presented themselves in front of Kona's Kilgore in such a strange state. The demigod's pupils dilated as he didn't hesitate to respond. He reached his left hand into his clothes and extended his right hand under his armpit, taking out 2 items. Amongst them, he held a strange revolver in his right palm. It was entirely gray in color, bigger than an ordinary revolver. It looked like it was half the size of a sledgehammer that was used in classical battles. Another unusual trait of the revolver was that it had 6 barrels, each rather thick. The mouth was dark, and its cylinder was embedded with more than 10 ugly rivets, making it have a rather crude beauty. Kona's Kilgore's left hand held an iron-skin pocket watch. On the watch's face, half of it was filled with neatly arranged symbols that followed the order of time, while the other half was a chaotic mess. It even intruded into the neighboring region. On both sides, it seemed impossible to see the machinery behind them as they formed into a structure that looked even more complex and headache-inducing. Almost at the same time, a figure emerged out of the gigantic crimson moon. It glided over at an extremely fast speed. He grew bigger and clearer. He was a young man with black hair, brown eyes, and cut features. The young man was wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. He held a unique revolver in one hand, and a transparent human skin glove covering the other. Under the bright illumination of the surroundings, he seemed to be burdened with the weight of the gigantic crimson moon. Gehrman Sparrow. Meow had an only slightly assisted fight against a sequence 4, where planning might go awry. I am looking forward to seeing how he will pull this off. Chapter 1026 2 Restrictions. Upon seeing the young man in the black trench coat appear with a black revolver in hand, Kona's Kilgore, who was no stranger to all the important figures in the world, immediately responded. The thumb on his left hand that held the iron-skinned pocket watch was rapidly moving, reaching for one of the metal buttons on the messy inlays of the pocket watch. He suddenly raised his right arm, aiming at Gehrman Sparrow with the 6 gray gun barrels that formed a circle. This process was like a fleeting spark that quickly came to an end. As for Kona's Kilgore's left thumb, it had pressed down. He overcame his instinct and didn't directly use restriction from the concerto of light and shadow. This was because he didn't know Gehrman Sparrow well enough, unsure as to what he was best at. Furthermore, the person with Gehrman Sparrow's appearance might not be Gehrman Sparrow. Blindly using restriction would only be a waste of an opportunity. He intended to observe and wait for a while longer before he came up with a more specific order to distort the laws. Bang, 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 bang. The strange revolver let out a roar of despair and spewed out a storm of black and icy bullets, instantly enveloping the enemy beneath the crimson moon. At this moment, Gehrman Sparrow's figure turned transparent and incorporeal. At the same time, the bullets tore through the target in the black trench coat, tearing apart the afterimage he left behind. And behind Kona's Kilgore, Gehrman Sparrow, with a cold expression, quickly appeared. His body was half-crouched, and he was leaning forward. The black top hat on his head appeared blood-red under the crimson moon's illumination. He suddenly raised the black-barreled revolver in his hand, opening his mouth slightly while aiming and squeezing the trigger. Bang! The floorboard to the right of Kona's Kilgore exploded into countless fragments. Gehrman Sparrow's shot had been ridiculously far off the mark. Furthermore, its destructive power was clearly lacking. This was the distortion power of an Earl of the Fallen. It caused the bullet's trajectory to deviate and have its power weakened. Seizing this opportunity, Kona's Kilgore used disorder to influence measurement standards, arriving above the balcony of the bedroom with one step. Then he half-turned his body, and with a smack, he pressed one of the metal buttons on his iron-skinned pocket watch. He then solemnly said, "Teleportation is prohibited here." Silently, Mager Manor, which was being illuminated by the gigantic crimson moon, experienced an unknown change. Gehrman Sparrow, whose body had rapidly turned faint after firing, appeared out of the void again. He had failed to successfully change positions. Concerto of light and shadow, restriction. To Kona's Kilgore, no matter what Gehrman Sparrow was good at, he had to immediately restrict his obvious ability to teleport. He suddenly turned around and jumped from the balcony, flying off like he was a spring that was released. This demigod of the military instantly reached a high altitude, but he didn't slow down or show any signs of falling. He maintained this speed as he went higher and higher in altitude, thus achieving flight. Earl of the Fallen, exploit. This was the exploitation of laws. By extending the jumping process, he could maintain a much longer duration. If Kona's Kilgore became a Sequence 2 angel, he could even jump onto the crimson moon with this beyonder power. While jumping in midair, Kona's Kilgore swung his right arm and released his disorder, beyonder power. He wanted to create a certain level of disorder in Mager Manor in this strange world. The true exit would then be exposed through the generated ripples. Instantly, the flowers and grapevines in the background of Mager Manor wavered. The black steeple, chimneys, and classical windows were covered in a faint shadow. In the entire world, Only the gigantic crimson moon which appeared to be right before them didn't change. It continued hanging silently in the sky. That's the exit. Kona's Kilgore grasped the patterns from the disorder, and using some actual feedback, he determined where the exit was. Without any hesitation, he exerted strength in his waist and used Magnify to forcefully change his direction, allowing him to rush towards the bright red moon. At that moment, a figure appeared in front of Mager Manor. It was none other than the cold-looking Gehrman sparrow who wore a black trench coat and half-top hat. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind appeared out of nowhere, sweeping Gehrman sparrow upwards as he chased after Kona's Kilgore. Amidst the wind, he raised the iron-black revolver in his right hand and pulled the trigger. Bang! A bullet flew out, exploding into countless fragments. They then turned into a storm that swept towards Kona's Kilgore. Death knell slaughter. It was a barrage of attacks. Almost at the same time, Kona's Kilgore changed direction without any warning, plummeting instead of rushing towards the moon. As a result, he dodged the bullet storm's assault as though he was prepared for it. No, it wasn't the case. He was prepared. Although his main goal was to escape the changed Mager Manor, he was still worried that Gehrman Sparrow would seize the opportunity to attack him. Therefore, he came up with a simple trap, planning to use his escape as bait to fish out the hiding Gehrman Sparrow. He could then take the initiative to heavily injure his opponent. Halfway down, Kona's Kilgore's figure suddenly bounced back, having distorted the direction he was heading in. This time, his destination was the next point, where Gehrman Sparrow was flying towards. Right on the heels of that, he yanked his pocket watch-wielding left hand back and grabbed Gehrman Sparrow through thin air, pulling him from a distance of nearly 100 meters away to just inches before him. Earl of the Fallen Magnify. Whoosh! Amidst the howling winds, Kona's Kilgore grabbed Gehrman Sparrow's clothes and pressed his strange revolver in his right hand forward. Bang! 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 Rever's shout of despair released countless bullets like a machine gun, instantly tearing Gehrman Sparrow's body into fluttering pieces of paper. Kona's Kilgore's gaze froze slightly as he immediately moved his left finger and pressed one of the metal buttons on his pocket watch. With a click, this Earl of the Fallen didn't hesitate to say in a domineering fashion, "Stand-ins are prohibited here." Just as he said that, the howling wind came to a stop. Mager Manor returned to silence once again as it was blanketed by dark shadows. Kona's Kilgore changed direction and began spiraling in midair in search of Gehrman Sparrow. However, there weren't any anomalies in the dark night sky. This Earl of the Fallen hesitated for a moment before preparing to continue rushing towards the gigantic crimson moon. At this moment, figures appeared in the garden, vineyard, and manor's main building. They either grew or became taller, rapidly taking form. They all had black hair and brown eyes with sharp facial features. They wore silk top hats and black trench coats. They were all Gehrman Sparrows. The only difference was that some of them were of normal build, some with their backs sunk inwards. The rest were bloated while others just a thin layer. Upon seeing this scene, Kona's Kilgore immediately recalled a dangerous enemy he had once encountered. One of the leaders of Intis's intelligence department, a bizarro sorcerer. Chapter 1027 Decei. After Kona's Kilgore realized which beyonder pathway his enemy belonged to, all the Gehrman Sparrows in the garden, vineyard, and main building raised their left hand. They curled their middle finger, ring finger, and pinky, extending their index finger and thumb, making them take on the simple shape of a gun. The index fingers that represented barrels and muzzles aimed at Kona's Kilgore in the air, before their respective arms jerked up seemingly due to the recoil. Bang! 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 Amidst deafening noises, illusory doves appeared to the side of the Earl of the Fallen, who was dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. They flew at him from every direction in a spectacular sight of utmost beauty. This was the random anomaly that came about from the iron-skin pocket watch and concerto of light and shadow. It made the air cannons which could blast through houses turn into doves of peace that didn't pose any threat. Having used disorder to disrupt the enemy's collective volley, Kona's Kilgore wasn't surprised to see the doves fly up and disperse into the air. He was already mentally prepared. He had already endured the negative effects that the sealed artifact had brought for years. Taking advantage of this opportunity, He didn't hesitate to raise his hands, which held the iron-skinned pocket watch and revolver, doing so in a bid to make them collide. This was distortion, one that targeted all the Gehrman sparrows beneath him. To Kona's Kilgore, what frustrated him the most when fighting a Bizarro sorcerer was that he was unable to tell if the enemy he faced was a marionette or the actual person, unless the marionette was of a very crude level. As such, he had many Beyonder powers he didn't dare use because they were ineffective against marionettes. A large-scale prohibition effect was still alright, but a single-target deprivation was meaningless in actual combat. No matter how many Beyonder powers of a marionette were deprived, it didn't affect the actual body. When that happened, his opponent just needed to switch marionettes to resolve the problem. Due to similar reasons, using Magnify on the mystical items on the marionettes was temporarily written off by Kona's Kilgore for strategic purposes. Similarly, an Earl of the Fallen's bestowment was of no use. It was even inferior to deprivation, as it could cause a Bizarro sorcerer's marionette to lose its corresponding Beyonder powers. However, the negative effects bestowed to a marionette was unable to interfere with it at all, be it turning them sluggish, losing the will to fight, making them turn anxious, or only focus on money. It was meaningless to a marionette who was, in essence, dead, without any ability to think or inclinations to take action. Therefore, Kona's Kilgore decided to first resolve the problem of identifying marionettes and the actual body. In this aspect, others might not have a solution, but a high-sequence Beyonder of the lawyer pathway definitely didn't have such worries. There were rules to everything, and everything followed certain rules. As a lawyer demigod, they were good at finding whatever loopholes there were to exploit them for themselves. Together with his combat experience fighting other Bizarro sorcerers, and how he had seriously considered solutions for dealing with them during the aftermath, Kona's Kilgore was quite certain that distortion could suppress his enemy. He knew that Bizarro sorcerers could seamlessly switch between their actual body and marionettes. He planned on distorting this, making the Bizarro sorcerer only be able to switch to 2 to 3 marionettes. This way, the difficulty of identifying the actual body and the marionette would be minimized. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that distortion couldn't exceed certain limits, and area-oriented prohibition effects had reached its limit, Kona's Kilgore definitely would have used a simpler method to deal with his opponent, such as forcing the Bizarro sorcerer to only be able to swap with one marionette, or he would prohibit swapping with marionettes. Kona's Kilgore smashed the Rever's Shout of Despair and Concerto of Light and Shadow together, as though he was compressing a large area to a small area. Earl of the Fallen Distortion. Silently, he produced a red glow with a deep shadow in his hand. It appeared as though he was offering it to the Gehrman sparrows in the garden, vineyard, and main building. As for the thick and thin, normal, or terrifying crazy adventurers, none of them experienced any abnormalities. Kona's Kilgore also suffered a random anomaly, one brought about by Concerto of Light and Shadow. It had changed the distortion effects to summoning a flower from the garden below. And at that moment, the air cannons that had turned into illusory doves continued. At that moment, the battle between two demigods turned ludicrous, comical, and funny. Of course, be it Gehrman Sparrow or Kona's Kilgore, none of them thought that was the case, especially the latter. He once again felt a familiar sense of helplessness. He didn't hesitate as he slammed his palms together again, completing the distortion. He wanted to rely on quantity to resist the random anomaly effect. However, Gehrman Sparrow wasn't a dead person who would abide by the etiquette of turn-based combat. The large swath of crazy adventurers either raised their hands in firing stances, or used a death knell with questionable authenticity, aiming at the Earl of the Fallen in midair. Meanwhile, Kona's Kilgore's heart stirred. He turned his head slightly to look up, and saw that a figure had appeared once again inside the gigantic crimson moon that hung above the black steeple. The figure was wearing a silk top hat, a black trench coat, a human skin glove, and an iron-black revolver. He had a cold expression and a deep outline. He was another Gehrman Sparrow. The crimson moon seemed to weigh down on his shoulders as he glided down, his body expanding and turning clearer in the process. As for the iron-black long-barreled revolver in his hand, he had already lifted it and aimed it at Kona's Kilgore. Bang! Bang! A bullet that had transparent and translucent sections to it shot out from the muzzle, heading straight for Kona's Kilgore. This was a deprivation bullet, one which was created using a worm of time that Amon's avatar had left behind. It was different from an Arbiter Pathways deprivation. In essence, it was theft. It could steal the last 3 Beyonder powers the target had used, and become empowered with the ability to use them. However, as long as the Arbiter Pathways deprivation selected a target, then they could directly deprive them of their ability. Although this bullet's deprivation effect didn't require contact in order to be effective, the target needed to be within a certain range and unable to leave the area. In short, one was unavoidable and could only be resisted or weakened through one's level or sequence's characteristics, while the other could effectively be dodged if the shot was detected ahead of time. Klein had given up on a sneak attack and had stalled for time because on the one hand he wanted Kona's Kilgore to use up all his prohibition and deprivation powers on Beyonder powers that appeared important to him. On the other hand, he was also waiting for the first random anomaly to happen. Then he would seize the gap in between the 2 anomalies to steal Kona's Kilgore's 3 most powerful powers with the deprivation bullet. For these 2 goals, he even handed Death Knell and Creeping Hunger to Winner Inuni, and made him appear like the real Gehrman Sparrow instead of a marionette. From the current developments, Kona's Kilgore was about to lose distortion, disorder, and magnify. Bang, 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 bang. The Gehrman Sparrows underneath collectively fired shots. Suddenly the air cannons and the deprivation bullet exploded, turning into red, purple, yellow, or green fireworks. However, they were unable to illuminate the deep dark sky. Concerto of Light and Shadow had once again created a random anomaly. It had produced its effects several times in a row without any pauses or delays. Kona's Kilgore immediately smiled and slammed his hands together again. All of a sudden, the young men wearing silk top hats and black trench coats under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination turned gloomy. Only 2 maintained their previous states. The Earl of the Fallen's distortion had taken effect. This meant that Gehrman Sparrow could only switch places with those 2 normal marionettes. Right on the heels of that, Kona's Kilgore didn't hesitate at all. He swung his arm and threw out the flower that was held together with the pocket watch out. The flower sped up and seemed to gain weight of unknown origins. Like an arrow, it shot towards one of the normal marionettes. This attack had been magnified, and also came with the effects of bribe, weaken, boom. The flower was like a cannon that crashed heavily into the ground, causing a violent quake. The surging waves it stirred up threw up the ordinary and unordinary humans in the vicinity, tearing or severely injuring them. The 2 marionettes which Gehrman Sparrow could swap with had been reduced to pieces of meat. Kona's Kilgore maintained his calm. As he distorted his trajectory in midair and circled the area while in flight, he raised Rever's shout of despair and aimed it at the Gehrman Sparrow that had descended from the crimson moon. At the same time, he silently prepared a bestowment. He wanted to give his target the negative state of lacking the will to fight. But at that moment, Kona's Kilgore's mind suddenly turned adrift as his thoughts turned sluggish. This turning into a marionette. Kona's Kilgore's mental state stiffened as he understood his current situation. He then saw that Gehrman Sparrow, who had descended from the crimson moon, wasn't as far away from him as before. The distance between them was only about 100 meters. He had unknowingly entered the range where spirit body threads could be controlled. He had stayed there for at least 3 seconds without realizing it. Deceit. A deceit bullet made from Amon's avatar. When Klein, who was actually Winner Inuni, had pulled the trigger, he hadn't only fired a deprivation bullet, but had actually fired twice. This was to prevent any random anomalies from happening. With an anomaly having happened once, even if another anomaly were to happen, only one of the 2 bullets that had been fired in intervals that were slightly spaced apart would be affected. After all, it was an intermittent random anomaly. It was possible to have it happen 2 to 3 times consecutively, but 4 or 5 consecutive occurrences were rare. Therefore, by attacking numerous times, there would be at least 1 or more instances that wouldn't suffer an anomaly. Just now, the firing of the second deceit bullet had been concealed by the collective volley from the marionettes. This was also why Klein made Winner Inuni use Death Knell. It was to rely on his luck. Finally, he successfully deceived Kona's Kilgore, and allowed Winner Anuni to secretly enter a safe distance of 150 meters from him, and begin controlling his spirit body threads, and obtained initial control. The moment this began, it meant that the Beyonder power was taking effect. Since there weren't any anomalies, it meant that there wouldn't be any more. 1028 Saving himself no good. My spirit body threads have been controlled by him. Having met faceless Beyonders, marionettists, or bizarro sorcerers, and even fighting senior Beyonders and demigods, Kona's Kilgore wasn't unfamiliar with the predicament he was in. He was even rather familiar with it and knew quite a bit. Therefore, he knew very well that he had fallen into a lethal trap. The time he had left to save himself didn't exceed 15 seconds. And in these 15 seconds, his thoughts would turn more and more sluggish, and the speed at which he could come up with solutions would slow down. Towards the end, just the thought of a solution would take him several seconds. Yet his stiff and dull body would require plenty of time to actualize his thoughts. This also meant that he had about 10 seconds to save himself. Of course, he had considered the corresponding response for the last few seconds. It was to abandon his body's control and reveal his mythical creature form. Through this, he could delay the time it took to become a marionette, and then use his existence to disrupt the enemy, dealing a blow to them to a certain extent. However, by doing so, even if he escaped the fate of becoming a marionette, and even managed to defeat his enemy, Kona's Kilgore didn't have much confidence in continuing to live. He wasn't a demigod who could freely switch between his human form and mythical creature form. He didn't have the confidence that he could maintain his rationale in a mythical creature form. In other words, the outcome of escaping the fate of becoming a marionette by releasing his mythical creature form likely meant that the human, Kona's Kilgore, would die, while a monster of the same name would occupy his body. Because of that outcome, Kona's Kilgore wouldn't make such an attempt unless it was necessary. While his thoughts weren't too sluggish, and with how he could hear Rever's shout of despair in his ears, this demigod of the military quickly came up with his first plan to save himself. He moved his right thumb at a speed that couldn't be considered slow. Earl of the Fallen, magnify. Kona's Kilgore didn't wish to magnify a particular state of his or the attack of a particular sealed artifact. Instead, it was used to magnify Rever's shout of despair's side effects. This special revolver allowed the wielder to hear the roar of despair from time to time, a rather serious blow to creatures without godhood, easily pushing them to the brink of losing control, to madness, to a mental breakdown, or mind blanking. And at sequence 4, the effects of the roar was greatly mitigated once his body possessed the characteristics of a mythical creature. To Kona's Kilgore, this roar was enough to turn his mind adrift and generate irascible mood swings. It didn't have much of an effect on him, and he had already gotten used to it. Seeing that the violent attack failed to achieve the desired effect, and that the amount of time he had left to save himself dwindled, Kona's Kilgore followed his thought-out plan and slowly relaxed his 5 left fingers without any thought. The iron-skin pocket watch left his palm and dropped to the ground. At such a critical moment, Kona's Kilgore decisively gave up the concerto of light and shadow, and made it stay far away from the battlefield, so as to avoid the effects of its random anomalies. Next, he might only have 1 or 2 chances to save himself. If another anomaly were to happen, the outcome was irreversible. The sealed artifact, which was a mixture of half-order and disorder, quickly plummeted to the ground. Kona's Kilgore moved his fingers with great difficulty as he faced Gehrman Sparrow, whose wounds were quickly healing. He originally had 2 choices. One was to use the third method he had originally thought of to save himself, an action that only required a mere thought. The other was to magnify his enemy's injuries and make him die on the spot. However, when Kona's Kilgore was still able to think relatively quickly, he didn't expect Gehrman Sparrow to not die after suffering so many gunshots. Even his control over the spirit body threads wasn't affected. There was no subsequent follow-up to this plan. And at this moment, his brain was already like a sluggish mush. He had no way of thinking too much. He didn't wish to waste any more time as he followed his plans. Whoosh! Around Gehrman Sparrow, who wore a transparent glove and iron-black revolver, the strong gusts of winds that held him up suddenly intensified and sent him flying up high. Whoosh! With the help of the strong winds, Gehrman Sparrow raced to the pitch-black sky under the watch of the gigantic crimson moon. Earl of the Fallen, magnify. The strong winds that helped Gehrman Sparrow fly had been magnified into a hurricane. This way, the distance between him and Kona's Kilgore would stretch beyond 150 meters. That would terminate the process of turning the latter into a marionette. Seeing his goal achieved, Kona's Kilgore, who had yet to regain his freedom, had his expression turn complicated bit by bit. The hurricane rapidly expanded and swept over to him, engulfing him and throwing him high into the sky. It made it impossible for the distance between him and Gehrman Sparrow to open up. He was truly unlucky. Under the night sky, amidst the moonlight, the two figures became smaller. Soon, the hurricane returned to normal as their momentum slowly diminished. Seizing this opportunity, Kona's Kilgore's nearly frozen mind had another idea. Stop! He stopped maintaining his power of flight and used gravity to plummet down like a meteor, doing so in order to rapidly open up a distance from Gehrman Sparrow. Then he ignored Gehrman Sparrow's ability to control the wind and pursue him. He slowly pulled his left arm in front of his body, like it was filled with rust. It was the action of closing a door. He wanted to use an Earl of the Fallen's distortion to create a wall-like seal in the air, putting an obstacle between Gehrman Sparrow and him, so that he couldn't carry out his pursuit. At that moment, the marionettes, the Gehrman Sparrows who were still alive underneath him, raised their left arms and made the gesture of firing a gun. Bang! 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 Bullets shot out, enveloping Kona's Kilgore in midair. After the shockwaves dispersed, Kona's Kilgore was covered with several bloody holes. Due to the pain and the jolting of his body from the first few bullets striking him, he had finally snapped out of the state of having his spirit body threads being controlled. The speed of his thoughts rapidly recovered. Following that, he disordered the subsequent volley at the critical moment and distorted his injuries, preventing himself from dying. All he suffered were serious injuries. And Gehrman Sparrow, who had many mystical items and was swooping down from above, he was obstructed by the invisible wall. He failed to catch up. With another distortion, Kona's Kilgore's descent speed slowed down as he gently landed on the ground. Before he could do anything else, his body froze again as he stood stiffly on the spot. He felt that his hands and feet were resisting him and not listening to his commands. He felt that there was an unfamiliar object hiding in his body. Then he saw a figure walk out of Mager Manor's master bedroom under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination, and stand on the balcony. He had black hair and brown eyes, wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. His facial features were pronounced, and he was another Gehrman Sparrow. This Gehrman Sparrow's right hand had the gesture of firing a gun. He then pulled back his hand and blew at it. That was Klein himself. What he shot out wasn't an air bullet, but a parasite bullet delivered with an air bullet's might. It was a parasite bullet created from a worm of time that Amon's avatar had left behind. It could create a worm of time that couldn't live too long, allowing it to parasitize the target and be controlled by the user. Klein had deliberately taken out the bullet and held it in his hand, specifically to wait for this opportunity. He was waiting for Kona's Kilgore to throw away Concerto of Light and Shadow, and not have the ability to dodge or use distortion. The former was predictable when the Earl of the Fallen's spirit body threads reached the state of initially being control. This was because he couldn't allow the random anomalies to influence his attempts to save himself. And the latter was all about patience. Just moments ago his patience had paid off. A chance appeared. Klein was the first to raise his hand and shoot. Without the random anomalies affecting the outcome, he had accurately shot a parasite bullet into Kona's Kilgore's body. If the thing that had previously taken effect wasn't a deceit bullet, but a deprivation bullet, then the strategy would be different. Briefly unable to control his body, Kona's Kilgore looked at the Gehrman Sparrow on the balcony remove his top hat, press his hand to his chest, and bow slightly at him under the gigantic crimson moon. As Gehrman Sparrow's trench coat fluttered, his thoughts had turned sluggish. Chapter 1029 Ruins Number 1 No. Kona's Kilgore stood on the spot as a strong feeling of despair emerged in his heart. As a military demigod who had experienced many dangers, He had a clear understanding of his current situation. He could already hear the footsteps of death approaching him. He wanted to struggle and risk it by revealing his mythical creature form. But his orders didn't do a thing with his sluggish mind. His body had been parasitized, and was no longer under his control. At that moment, Kona's Kilgore wasn't even capable of shedding a tear. Under the gigantic crimson moon's illumination, 1 second after another passed. Suddenly, Kona's Kilgore raised his left hand and touched his crew haircut. He had already become Klein's marionette. In fact, he still had a chance at the final moment. As the parasite effect didn't last long enough for him to become a marionette, he had those 2 or 3 seconds to reveal his mythical creature form. But the problem was that his body also had the effects of misdirection and deceit. As time passed, his thoughts turned more and more sluggish and wasn't able to grasp that short opportunity. Klein looked at his new marionette and exhaled silently. He looked up at the clear and bright red moon and said, "It's done." Amidst the gigantic crimson moon, a black dot instantly appeared and descended from the sky. It was none other than the Church of Evemite's Archbishop, servant of concealment, Ariana, who wore a simple robe with tree bark as a belt. In this concealed world, this ascetic didn't use any beyonder powers to float in midair. She cast her eyes at the Earl of the Fallen beneath. She gently raised her right hand as Kona's Kilgore's slightly blurry soul emerged from the military demigod's head. Klein lost his control over his marionette as a result of this. He wasn't too surprised by this because he hadn't sent a worm of spirit through the spirit body threads over. His control over the marionette was essentially still at a sequence 5 state, and not at the demigod level. "Where did you go just now?" Ariana asked calmly as she looked at Kona's Kilgore's soul. Kona's Kilgore's expression twisted slightly before replying. "Ruins number 1. Is this a contractual promise or a psychological cue?" Klein, who watched the spirit channeling from the side, sensed something from the Earl of the Fallen's reaction. However, this didn't affect anything because they were in a concealed world, one which no one knew of or could sense. "Where is that ruin? Who did it once belong to? What is it being used for?" As an archbishop of the Evernight goddess and an angel of the corresponding pathway, Ariana shared a certain amount of authority in concealment. Therefore, she didn't start with the simplest questions, but went straight to the point. She wasn't afraid of any accidents. Kona's Kilgore's soul trembled slightly as he exuded a feeling as if he would automatically blow up, but ultimately, nothing happened. He hesitantly replied, "That ruin is located deep underground at the Sturlwyn segment of the Tussock River. It has a setup that interferes with the powers of divination and prophecy." Sturlwyn segment. This is quite far from the mountain where Mr. A was at, and where you disappeared from. From the looks of it, you were very cautious. That point-to-point teleports effects are greater than I expected. Klein quickly conjured a picture of the terrain of Backlund's northwestern outskirts. Kona's Kilgore continued replying, "That ruin used to belong to Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. I'm not sure what it's currently used for. I'm unable to enter the depths of the ruins, and am only in charge of sending in people and materials acquired via various means." The name Blood Emperor Alista Tudor made Ariana fall silent. About 3 seconds later she asked, "What materials did you acquire?" This time, Kona's Kilgore didn't put up much of a resistance. He listed them down, including large amounts of mercury, iron ore and ritual materials of different domains. Klein was unable to obtain any effective information from that, because it was too well-rounded. It was possible to do anything. They really are very careful, using large amounts of sundries to hide what they're truly searching for. Even the demigod in charge of these matters isn't aware of the reason. This is very in line with the way a spectator pathway beyonder works. It was designed by the psychology alchemists? Klein nodded indiscernibly with a guess in mind. Ariana didn't seem to notice anything as she asked, "Do you have any guesses on what they're doing? If so, what?" "Yes, I suspect that they're digging up something and attempting to make sacrifices." Kona's Kilgore voiced out his judgment. Ariana silently looked down at him for a while and said, "Who got you involved in the underground ruins? Who are the people who can enter the depths of the ruins?" Kona's Kilgore struggled once again, but there were no anomalies. He said hesitantly, "I received His Majesty's orders." I was able to become a demigod because he provided me with the formulas, ingredients, and the opportunity. He even bestowed me with the Concerto of Light and Shadow, allowing me to act as a Sequence 5 Beyonder, even in situations where I can't hide my strength. Apart from His Majesty entering the depths of the ruins, only 2 other demigods of the royal family can enter. One of them is Prince Grove, and the other is Duchess Georgina. They both have Augustus as their last names. But the royal family doesn't only have 2 demigods. Miss Justice doesn't know much of these 2 and mentioned that they seldom participate in social events. Even their seats as House of Lords Member of Parliaments are given to their children. Yes, at the demigod level, even if they lack the Beyonder characteristics of not dying and not aging, it wouldn't be a problem living for more than 100 years. It's really not suitable for them to hold official posts and repeatedly appear in public. Klein tried hard to recall, but he failed to gather anything else. Ariana was silent for a few seconds before suddenly asking, "Have you met Corrins in the underground ruins?" "Who is he?" Konas Kilgore asked in confusion. Ariana didn't answer and continued asking, "Besides them, who else have you met in the underground ruins?" Konas Kilgore maintained his sluggish state, which was characteristic of spirit channeling. People from the Demonist sect and psychology alchemists. The former was originally represented by Despair Nightingale Panatia, but was changed to Saintess of White Katarina. The latter is Vin Rambis. Did they enter the depths of the underground ruins? Ariana asked meticulously. "I don't know. I wasn't following them all the time." Konas Kilgore shook his head. "At least when I met them, they were all in the periphery." Ariana asked other questions in an attempt to draw out the general outline of the matter, via other angles. However, it was obvious that George Ill's arrangements were flawless. Even a demigod like Konas Kilgore only knew about the mission that he was responsible for, and could only move about in designated regions. He was unable to learn more. After some thought, Ariana flipped up her right hand and gently pressed down, pushing Konas Kilgore's soul back into his body. Klein's control over his marionette was restored. This made Klein sigh inwardly. The authority of concealment is really impressive. Even if Ma'am Ariana were to question my marionette one day, I wouldn't even know. At this moment, Ariana turned her body and spoke to the Gehrman sparrow on the balcony. A problem with George III has basically been confirmed, as well as where the underground ruins are. I will immediately meet with the archbishops of the Church of Storms and Church of Steam, convincing them to take action tonight and opening the ruins. Before I inform you, control Konas Kilgore and pretend that everything is fine before making him vanish. Are you worried that the enemy will notice a problem with Konas Kilgore while negotiating with the Church of Storms and Church of Steam, making it so that they can seal off the underground ruins or activate other emergency plans? Klein had a general understanding of the matter and nodded. "No problem." Ariana, who didn't have adorned hair, didn't speak further. With a casual wave of her hand, the iron-skinned pocket watch flew over. This sealed artifacts was bestowed by George III. Perhaps we might be able to find some clues from its origins. "Does that mean you're taking it away?" Klein replied without any objection. "I'll leave it to you." He really didn't have any complaints about that, and he even believed that it was only right. After all, half of the battle's success was due to Ariana's contribution with the concealed world and blessing him with misfortune. In the event that she didn't take the Concerto of Light and Shadow, Klein would mention it. When it came to matters like this, he was always just. And the Concerto of Light and Shadow was the spoils of war that he didn't want the most. This was because it was at complete odds with his combat style as a bizarro sorcerer. The random anomalies would affect him, and the weakening effect was something worse than the enemy. If Klein's spoils of war from this matter was the pocket watch, then he had considered tricking, promoting it to the Snake of Fate Will Septon. Only a life school of thought demigod who relied on luck to survive could commandeer the Concerto of Light and Shadow. And when that happens, with such a huge secret organization and a sequence one, they definitely had powerful sealed artifacts that could be used to trade for it. Upon receiving his reply, Ariana gently nodded. She then threw the iron-skinned pocket watch back at Konas Kilgore, making the Earl of the Fallen look no different from before. Her figure vanished as though it had been erased by an eraser. Even the pitch-black world with the gigantic crimson moon hanging in the sky, the steeple, and chimneys were quickly wiped away. In the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Klein was inside the master bedroom, and Kona's Kilgore was in a guest room tens of meters away. Clenched tightly in his hand was Rever's shout of despair. Then this brigadier general of MI9 used disorder to place the revolver back into his underarm holster and pick up the mager wine he had previously poured out and took a sip. Chapter 1030 Joint Operations Backland, North Borough, St. Samuel Cathedral. The Cardinal of the Church of Storms, Archbishop of the Backland Diocese, Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus descended amidst the wind, landing inside the steeple with a huge clock to the left. He donned a black robe with the storm symbol and had thick facial hair. His hair was short and stood up, colored in a dark blue that was almost black. This muscular demigod cast his gaze to the other side, and said to the figure who was already waiting there, "Horimic, do you know what happened? Why did Anthony suddenly invite us over here?" The person he spoke to was dressed in a white priest robe and a clergyman's bonnet. He had a genial and mild expression, and he was none other than the Church of Steam's Divine Council member, Archbishop of the Backland Diocese, the demigod, Horimic Haydn. Upon hearing Randall's question, Horimic calmly replied, "I didn't arrive here much earlier than you. In fact, I only left the laboratory for a few minutes." He wasn't only a clergyman but also a famous scientist. He was an emeritus professor at Backland University's physics department. Randall Valentinus was just about to say something when he suddenly saw a figure walk up the narrow spiral staircase and arrive at the peak in the darkness that the crimson moon wasn't able to illuminate. This figure was dressed in a black clergyman robe with red accents. By his chest hung 5 dark sacred emblems. He was clean-shaven, and his eyes were deep, dark, and tranquil. He was none other than one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of Evernight, Backland Diocese's person in charge, St. Anthony Stevenson. Is there something that can't wait until daybreak? Or do people from the Church of Evernight enjoy discussing matters at night? Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus asked. Anthony came to a stop after walking up the flight of stairs, and said with a serious expression, "A very pressing matter." "What is it?" Randall asked immediately. At this moment, Horimic Haydn also cast his gaze at Anthony Stevenson, awaiting his answer. In similar situations, Horimic especially liked the existence of people from the Church of Storms. This meant that they would take the initiative to ask questions, and that there was no need to be euphemistic. It didn't require him to say anything else. Anthony looked at them separately and said, "It's related to the royal family. I'll let Ma'am Ariana do the honors." Just as he said that, a barefoot, bun-haired female figure in a simple robe with tree bark for a belt quickly outlined itself out of the shadows. Upon seeing this figure, Randall and Horimic immediately bowed. "Good evening, Ma'am Ariana." Their expressions turned solemn at the same time, for they had a deep understanding of how important and crucial the matter that was happening tonight was. It was definitely not a small matter for a grounded angel to appear. Meanwhile, they couldn't help but be roused up. They realized that they had no idea when this matron of the Evernight cloister, the servant of concealment, Ma'am Ariana, had arrived in Backland. Under normal circumstances, the 3 churches, the royal family, and the military enjoyed a certain degree of tacit cooperation. Grounded angels and Grado sealed artifacts wouldn't appear in Backland. "Good evening, archbishops," Ariana answered without any signs of haughtiness. She then raised her right hand and grasped onto thin air. A faint light was emitted as it transformed into a scene along with the darkness. It was the entire conversation between Ariana and Kona's Kilgore. This secret that appeared to have been kept for quite some time had finally presented itself before others. As they watched, Deep Blue Officiant Randall Valentinus couldn't help but say, he actually advanced to sequence 4 and became a demigod. This archbishop knew Kona's Kilgore. He originally believed that this deputy director of MI9 was only a sequence 5, and had relied on a sealed artifact with severe negative effects to obtain combat strength at the demigod level. He never expected it to be a disguise. The Church of Storm's influence on the military was greater than the 2 major churches. No one answered Randall. After the secret was fully revealed, Gehrman said, "One involves a secret ruin of the Blood Emperor, and with large numbers of people sent in. These 2 points put together cannot be anything good." "Indeed." Randall nodded in agreement. "Let's head to the ruins now." Ariana looked around and calmly said, "This involves the royal family and the king. It's best if you seek permission from your own Holy See." In this angel's choice of words, the Holy See referred to their respective churches' headquarters, the core seat of power of the church. "All right," the 2 archbishops replied without any hesitation. After a while, Deep Blue officiant Randall Valentinus and Gehrman Haydn received feedback from the sealed artifacts they carried. Together with Anthony Stevenson and Ariana, they headed for the Blood Emperor ruins that Kona's Kilgore had previously entered. Ariana then took out an iron-black coat of arms with complicated symbols, and she tried to activate it. She didn't make any disguise attempt, and she stood there calmly as though she wasn't worried that the guards in the ruins would recognize her. Seeing this servant of concealment's actions, Gehrman seemed to be in thought. Randall wore a look of calm and didn't believe that it posed any problems. In the underground ruins, on a strange metal pedestal, a ghostly blue beam soared up and formed a door. 4 black-armored guards immediately observed the situation outside through the ghostly blue beam, and planned on using a predetermined method to confirm if the person who had summoned the door of teleportation was disguised, so as to decide whether the door was to be opened. However, they didn't see anything. The area outside was empty. Just as they felt intense unease and confusion, a figure quickly outlined itself behind them. It was none other than the leader of the Church of Evernight Ascetics, Ariana, who wore a patched robe. In the blink of an eye, the 4 guards fell into a deep sleep. Anthony, Randall, and Gehrman entered the underground ruins one after another. They didn't directly follow the path down. Instead, they passed through the hall, floating in midair as they overlooked everything. This was a world ruled by darkness. Small amounts of light came from the strange moss growing in different spots, as well as the flaming torches that came from the human-sized buildings. With their illuminating light, even beyonders without night vision could grasp the overall appearance of the huge ruin. On one side was a gray rock wall. It extended upwards without an end, and it seemed to be connected to the ground. On the other side, there was a bottomless dark valley as if it were the abyss where devils lived. A road paved with stone slabs lay in the middle connecting the halls and buildings together. From time to time, humans would come and go in silence. The archbishops of the 3 churches were just about to capture a few people who could enter the ruins to interrogate them about the situation inside, when a figure flew out of the dark valley, heading straight for the demigods. The figure had a long face and wore a white hairnet. 2 curly mustaches grew above his lips, and he had thick brows. His eyes were slightly bigger and looked rather similar to a certain poker card figure. He wore a gown and had a huge cloak over him. The tips of his shoes were extremely long, and his attire was unlike the current times. It was as though he lived 100 years ago. Archbishops like Anthony and Gehrman were no stranger to him. He knew that he was Prince of Sonia, Grove Augustus, one of the demigods of the royal family. "How did you enter?" Grove asked first, his expression a little surprised and uncertain. They looked at each other, and Anthony took the initiative to say, "We've always been investigating the large number of mysterious disappearances, and we had locked onto MI9's Kona's Kilgore. Through him we found this place." Grove's expression changed slightly as he looked at the woman who left one's heart feeling tranquil. He deliberated and asked, "Ma'am Ariana?" "Yes, I was in charge of the disappearance case," Ariana answered succinctly. Prince Grove smiled bitterly. "We were too greedy. After discovering this ruin, we only thought of digging and retrieving the items inside. To keep it a secret, we even had certain connections with the Demonist sect. Through the people they gathered, we built a passageway and held certain rituals. No, it's not what you think. They were just normal rituals, and they're still alive deep within the ruins. If you don't believe me, I can lead you down to take a look. Apart from the unopened seals and buildings, there's nothing." Upon hearing his reply, Anthony, Gehrman, and Randall exchanged looks, registering the puzzlement in each other's eyes. This was completely different from their expectations. This made them suspect that something was wrong. Things weren't as serious as they had imagined at this moment, Ariana said. You even created the Great Smog. No. Prince Grove shook his head again. That was a lesson we learned from cooperating with the demonesses. They actually tried to control Edisac and used him to gain control over the kingdom. After it was seen through by us, they created the Great Smog. From that moment forth, we broke all contact with them. Having said that, he pointed below and frankly said, how could we do such a thing just to secretly dig up the Blood Emperor's ruins? As long as you head deep down and closely examine it, you will understand what I mean. Haha, don't worry. With Ma'am Ariana around, no traps will work. Besides, ignoring the fact that we lack such power, even if we were able to secretly bury you in the ruins, the churches will discover a problem. I don't believe that you didn't report this matter to your respective holy sees before coming. If you don't return in a while, they will definitely take the corresponding actions. Demigods like Randall and Anthony fell into thought as they cast their gazes at the simply dressed Ariana. Ariana calmly nodded. Okay. The angel and 3 saints then entered the depths of the ruins under the guidance of Prince Grove. They discovered that there was a ruin hidden in the darkness, with no man having set foot there, as well as men and women who had been taught to form different rituals. Everything was orderly and serene. Ariana, Horimic, and the other demigods acted according to their own thoughts and separately investigated the different regions. They even left and went further to investigate, but they failed to discover anything. After receiving Ariana's notice, Klein changed Kona's Kilgore into a servant inside the manor, making the MI9 deputy director vanish. Then he unhurriedly held a sacrificial ritual. He sent the items he received above the gray fog for further research, patiently awaiting daybreak. Chapter 1031 Possibility. As the sky lit up, the manors along the Tussock River's north bank began to wake up amidst the morning mist. The tall and portly from his cage came to the guest room where Kona's Kilgore slept last night. He knocked on the door and prepared to have breakfast with this MI9 deputy director. However, there was no response. Has the Brigadier General headed for the dining room? From his cage turned around in puzzlement and left the first floor. After breakfast was over, everyone realized that Kona's Kilgore had vanished. Under Dwayne Dantes' lead, they headed outside the guest room and watched the land steward, Richardson, open the door with his key. There was no one inside. Does Brigadier General Kilgore have a hobby of taking morning strolls? Mocked asked curiously as he pinched the 2 ends of his cheekbones. From his cage shook his head without hesitation. No. Did you hear anything last night? The Chancellor of the Backlund University of Technology, Portland Moment, surveyed the area and asked. Mocked recalled for a moment. No, it was very quiet, perfect for a vacation. Beside him, Hazel looked into the room curiously, but she couldn't think of any possibilities. At this moment, From his cage raised his theory. Brigadier General Kilgore is an important member of the military, and he often needs to handle unexpected matters. Perhaps he had long left the manor and returned to Backlund. This steam car tycoon was clearly trying his best to downplay the matter. He seems to know something. Or at least he guessed that Kona's Kilgore came to Mager Manor for some private, personal goal. Klein listened to their conversation as he said to Butler Walter and Land Steward Richardson with a heavy look, "Ask the servants in the manor if they had seen Brigadier General Kilgore last night or this morning. If they haven't, send someone back to Backlund and visit Brigadier General Kilgore's family. Inform them of this matter, and let them decide whether we need to immediately make a police report." After giving his instructions, Klein stroked his white sideburns and said to Mocked and his other guests, "Things aren't clear yet. Perhaps Brigadier General Kilgore left because of an urgent matter and didn't want to hold up everyone's vacation. Let's do this. We'll continue with our hunting plans and return when the police arrive." As Brigadier General Kona's Kilgore's companion, From his cage had raised an excuse for the crisis, one that was rather convincing. Mocked and company agreed with Dwayne Dantes' suggestion and left the area. Hazel walked right at the back and glanced at Brigadier General Kona's Kilgore's guest room and its neighboring room. She had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right as she subconsciously wanted to use her powers as a cryptologist to reconstruct the situation. However, an intense sense of fear emerged deep in her heart. She had no idea what she was afraid of, so she eventually gave up on the idea. She vaguely felt that she had some experience in such matters, and those experiences told her not to look at things she shouldn't see, or listen to things she shouldn't hear. After the guests and servants left that floor, a thick carpet that held the weight of the coffee table inside the room beside Konaz's guest room began moving. Bit by bit, it pulled itself up from under the sofa and coffee table, without causing much of a stir. Following that, the yellowish-brown carpet stood up and revealed its other side. It was solidified flesh. The flesh was squirming and reorganizing itself, and it soon transformed into a person, a mixed-blood young man. This was Dwayne Dantes' valet Anuni, and the one following Dwayne Dantes was Konaz Kilgore. He wore the same face and had the same build. To Klein, there was no need to disguise Anuni in such a manner. He could get him to transform himself into another person and blend in with the servants, using an illusion to interfere with their senses, making them unable to discover the addition of this person. It was a simpler and more reliable method. However, acting remained important to a demigod. It was key to accelerating the potion's digestion, and for resisting the inclinations of losing control and madness. Therefore, Klein would deliberately try to be bizarre in his handling of many matters. Of course, he didn't wish to harm the innocent. Even in creating bizarre and eerie situations, he would try hard not to let others notice it. It was to prevent them from being left with a mental scar, due to excessive fright. The bizarre and eerie atmosphere was mainly for himself, to gain the approval of the potion inside him. This would undoubtedly accelerate the digestion rate of his potion, but without the feedback of a spectator, it meant that the acting wasn't complete enough. This made the speed at which he digested the Bizarro Sorcerer potion not as fast as he imagined. Despite doing so many things and trying out so many acts, Klein didn't feel that it was possible for him to reach Sequence 3 by the end of this year. Backlund East Borough, inside a 2-bedroom rental apartment. Zio sat on an unstable chair as she stared out of the window in a daze, her expression a little gloomy. Furs swallowed her saliva and sat opposite Zio, blocking her line of sight. You seem to have lost all your motivation? Do you not know what to do after receiving that answer? It's because you have no access to the king? Zio's eyes fluttered as she slowly came to her senses. Whether it's to redeem my father's reputation or revenge, the chances are slim when facing the king. I can't think of a way to complete something like that. That's because you're too weak. When you reach Sequence 4 and become a demigod, you'll discover many solutions. The only problem is that it'll be more dangerous. First tried encouraging her. In addition, you can still use others. Just like the person monitoring Gehrman. She too wanted to know who Viscount Stratford was loyal to. She must be interested in the king's secret. Gehrman. Zio repeated the name as her state of mind suddenly recovered. Beside them, there was a bronze cross and a ghostly blue gem that resembled a vertical eye on the table. The gem's exterior had thread-like patterns, the beyonder characteristic that appeared after Gehrman's death. It made the things around it appear mild, and it accentuated their beauty. However, with the bronze cross around, its glow was confined to a small area. That monitor is one of the culprits behind Gehrman's death, Zio said rather seriously. They had already found a spot to bury Gehrman, and Furs had flipped through Lamino's travels to placate the dead Gehrman. Furs immediately nodded. Yes, it's why she was instigated to investigate the king's secret, and come into contact with the latent danger. Didn't you say that she might be able to monitor where we used to live? We can find an opportunity to return incognito, throw a letter into the mailbox, and write that Viscount Stratford is loyal to King George III, and that he has a huge secret. This way, I believe she will be able to see it. Zio thought carefully and nodded solemnly. Okay. After discussing what they were about to do next, Furs stood up and pointed at the bronze cross. It's time for us to show our sincerity to Mr. Fool for all the help we received. I plan on sacrificing it to Mr. Fool now. You don't have any objections, right? No, Zio replied without hesitation. Mager manner. It was another evening. The news sent back by Konaz Kilgore's family was to wait since this MI9 deputy director often acted in such ways. involving himself in matters of national security. Therefore, Mocked and company didn't panic. They made use of the animals they hunted and roasted them over a bonfire at a party on the lawn behind the manor. Seeing the gentlemen roll up their sleeves and busy themselves around the roasting rack, the ladies heading over to help from time to time, and the children running around eagerly, Klein held a cup of sweet white wine, a fine product of Mager Manor, and sat on a white wooden chair, a smile suffusing his lips. Beside him was his mixed-blood valet, Inuni, who stood upright while awaiting instructions. And inside a particular room in the manor's main building, a pair of eyes were silently looking down. It belonged to a person who looked identical to Inuni. The evening breeze blew past. Just as Klein was about to get up and showcase what it meant to roast meat from Decei at the roasting rack, he suddenly saw a figure phase into existence in front of him. It was Ariana, who wore a simple robe and tree bark as a belt. This servant of concealment looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, "There was nothing special in the underground ruins." She then recounted the main points of what she and the 3 archbishops saw, as well as the explanation given by Prince of Sonia, Grove Augustus. That doesn't make sense. The first thought that appeared in Klein's mind was suspicion. As Viscount Stratford had Saintess of White Katerina provide him with assistance, this clearly meant that the king's faction hadn't completely severed ties with the Demonist sect. Under the premise that the Great Smog of Backlund had already happened, their continued relationship with the Demonist sect meant that it wasn't something that could be explained as hoping to keep the Blood Emperor's ruins for themselves with such in-depth cooperation. Would the Demonist sect and psychology alchemists not wish to split the spoils? In that case, why wouldn't they directly seek the help of the 3 churches? Klein instinctively believed that the problem with the ruins hadn't truly been discovered. He suspected that there had been a leak during the entire process, allowing the king to make preparations. With Ma'am Ariana around, the possibility of discovering something amiss via the methods of divination and prophecy can be eliminated. From my killing of Kona's Kilgore to the 3 churches' joint operation, the number of people who know of it doesn't exceed 10. Furthermore, they all involve the high-ranking members of each church. How is it possible that there was a leak? Viscount Stratford's problem resulted in the people in the ruins deploying contingency plans? No, his standing wasn't at that level. Even Kona's Kilgore didn't know the exact situation, much less him. He was only in charge of liaising with the Demonist sect and handling matters at the periphery. He might not even know of the underground ruins. Klein's thoughts raced as he sought the reasons. He first eliminated the possibility of them being prepared due to Viscount Stratford. After all, the death of the captain of the Royal Guards wasn't that important or crucial. As such, there were very few possibilities that could explain the situation. 1. A person who knew of the secret amidst this sequence of events had deliberately or unintentionally leaked the matter, due to particular reasons. 2. They had noticed something wrong with Kona's Kilgore's seemingly ordinary state, but Klein didn't notice anything. The psychology alchemists are in cahoots as well. Could my thoughts be read and the secret revealed? But I have the gray fog augmenting me. No matter what, there will be some abnormality. It's just like when I faced that spectator demigod with Anderson. The psychology alchemists originated from something Hermes left behind. Hermes's. As he thought about it, Klein's eyes suddenly widened. He instinctively stopped himself from thinking deeper about it, as he shot a look at Ariana and relaxed. He asked, "Is this place concealed?" "Very," Ariana replied calmly. People behind her came and went, but no one noticed her. Klein exhaled as he formulated his thoughts. Emperor Roselle once said in his diary that the members of that ancient secret organization are all important figures. Then, could it be possible that one of the high-ranking members of the 3 churches is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order? And could it be that the ruins which Ariana and the archbishop saw wasn't the real one, but one imagined by Adam? Chapter 1032. Forceful Purifier. Restraining his thoughts, and looking at the angel of concealment across him, Klein deliberated over his words. Is there a possibility that the ruins you saw was actually imagined? He didn't directly mention Adam, or the Twilight Hermit Order. Afraid that discussing such matters in Ariana's concealment zone would still be heard by the Adam, who wielded the spectator pathway's uniqueness, and recently obtained 0-08. As he was inside Ariana's world of concealment, Klein believed that thinking of Adam and the Twilight Hermit Order wasn't likely to pose any problems, but it wasn't necessarily the case when saying it out loud. After all, Mr. Dorr could freely discuss Adam with Emperor Roselle back then, not only because of the beyonder powers of a secret sorcerer's secret keeping, but more so because he was also a king of angels, a level not lower than Adam and Amon, perhaps even higher. Imagined. Ariana repeated Klein's keyword softly as though she had figured out something at her level. She was no stranger to ancient history and the main characteristics of the 22 pathways. Furthermore, she was also an angel that represented the authority of concealment. She possessed the highest clearance in reading all the church's confidential information. A few seconds later, Ariana observed Dwayne Dantes, who remained sitting there. Psychology alchemists. From Kona's Kilgore statement, it was obvious that the King's faction was working with the Psychology Alchemists. And this was an organization that had the spectator pathway in its control. Klein first nodded and then added, "Their higher-ups likely do not have the ability of turning imagination into a reality. In this world, there are only 1 to 2 people who have such authority." Ariana nodded in thought. "I understand. Now that the underground ruins are open to us, I will find a chance to verify it. If it's true, it means that 1 or several archbishops of the Church of Steam and Storms are working for him." She didn't raise the possibility that the Church of Evernight's upper echelons were problematic, as the goddess wielded the authority of concealment. It was very difficult to keep such matters from her for prolonged periods of time. Klein couldn't help but ask in surprise, "The underground ruins will be left open to the 3 churches?" Yes, if it truly is imagined. It means that their cooperation is on the brink of success, and that they just need to delay things a little longer. Ariana simply explained her theory. "This is also what I'm thinking. The tide of the times is coming in a bid to drown out everything. Thankfully, I'm a lot more prepared than before. I now have a demigod-level marionette, and in certain areas he's stronger than me. After all, he can use my beyonder powers, while I can't use his. Since I can't digest the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion anytime soon and seek my advancement, strengthening my marionette is also an effective measure to protect myself. I can also take note of the Sanguines and Miss Sharon's plot against the Rose School of Thought." Klein's thoughts instantly turned clear. He reined in his thoughts and casually asked, "Do all 3 churches doubt Prince Grove's explanation?" "They don't." Ariana frankly shook her head. Kona's Kilgore had mentioned Katarina. "But you don't have evidence. After all, they can explain that after they split with the Demonist sect, Katarina was sent to discuss things and attempt to make amends, but was cruelly rejected. During this process, as they knew each other's secrets, none of them took action at the meeting. It could then be explained that Kona's Kilgore, a demigod who wasn't privy to the matter, made the mistake that the cooperation effort was still in place. And faced with an angel family, one that wields at least half the forces in the military, the 3 churches won't immediately lose decorum with them unless there's evidence. Firstly, they aren't united, and they have to consider that if a civil war were to erupt, countries like Fainapotter, Intis and Fainapotter, as well as the churches of Eternal Blazing Sun, God of Combat, Earth Mother, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom might try to take advantage of the situation. Klein quickly came up with an analysis of the present situation. He simply mentioned, "There were signs of Saintess of White Katarina appearing over at Viscount Stratford's side. I will try to find her." Apart from that, Klein still wanted to find the dangerous Trissy and eliminate her, making up for his mistake of letting her go just because he wanted to use her. Her value was clearly not as dangerous as her. "I'll try to do so as well." Ariana indicated that she would investigate the clue regarding Katarina. I have to say that Ma'am Ariana's attitude when discussing matters with me is rather comforting. She doesn't exude that condescending attitude an angel or archbishop has. She completely treats me as an equal." After hearing Ariana's words, Klein felt a baffling sense of poignancy. He instead asked, "Has Vin Rambus of the Psychology Alchemists been captured?" This was one of the key figures mentioned in the information from Kona's Kilgore's testimony, one of the clues that exposed the machinations of the King's faction. "He has gone missing." Ariana answered succinctly. As expected. The possibility of a leak has increased again. Van Rambus has gone underground, but that doesn't mean that he can't contact Miss Justice and other members directly. When the time comes, Miss Justice has already hated him for some time. The only problem is whether Adam will appear in Backlund and imagine fake ruins. If that were the case, attacking Van Rambus might mean a non-zero probability that he's being watched by this King of Angels. It might even be the case that he will sit beside Van Rambus without anyone knowing. The more Klein thought, the more of a headache he had. It had to be said that in an era in which deities rarely descended upon the real world, the two brothers Adam and Amon were the limits to one's level and strength. They were synonymous with being terrifying, powerful, frightening, and formidable. A king of angels was an existence closest to that of a deity. Compared to Amon, I'm more afraid of Adam. He might be sitting beside you, listening to you and watching you smile while he reads your most truthful thoughts, making you die in the most natural, logical, but baffling manner. At this thought, Klein couldn't help but look around, afraid that the simple priest with pure-looking eyes and beard would be holding a tray, standing beside the roasting rack as he waited for the food and watched him with a smile. Without a doubt, Klein didn't discover anything. Noticing his reaction, Ariana calmly added, "He isn't here." Phew, thankfully, there's the blessings of an angel of concealment. Klein controlled his thoughts and nodded gently. I will take note of Van Rambis's whereabouts. Ariana nodded and said, after this matter is over, you can attempt to pray to the goddess for a bestowment. That is to say that the goddess is very satisfied with my performance up to now. When the time comes, she will bestow me with the scholar of your potion formula. Klein roughly understood Ariana. He stood up and tapped his chest 4 times. Praise the lady. Ariana also drew the crimson moon. Praise the lady. Her figure disappeared bit by bit as though she had been erased. Yet the guests at the bonfire party didn't notice the arrival of the ascetic at all. Klein sat down again and continued analyzing his situation from another angle. Kona's Kilgore disappeared without any warning. From the evidence presented by Ma'am Ariana and the words she said, it implied that the MI9 deputy director is in her hands. In other words, the assault on Kona's Kilgore is definitely related to the Church of Evernight. Kona's Kilgore disappeared in Mager Manor, which belongs to Dwayne Dantes, and he is a believer of the Evernight goddess. From what the King's faction and the psychology alchemists know, Dwayne Dantes can likely be confirmed to be a secret informant of the Church of Evernight. This way, my safety can be guaranteed, but I can't avoid being observed and monitored. I have to be careful. I have to think of a reason to add a new servant. I can't keep having Kona's Kilgore or Anuni hide in this manner. This will make it easier for a problem to be discovered. Or maybe I can make one marionette turn into human skin clothes, fusing with the other marionette. As he thought, Klein stood up and placed the glass of sweet white wine on the table beside him. He then turned to walk to the main building of the manor, and entered one of the bathrooms. He then took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. He summoned the sea god scepter, and used the prayer point he marked as Anuni to observe every corner of Mager Manor. During this process, Klein's mind was somewhat tense, worried that he would see a priest wearing simple clothes while having a beard and golden eyes. Of course, compared to seeing this priest, he was more afraid of the priest looking up and smiling back at him, raising the cup of wine in his hand. Fortunately, after a series of inspections, he confirmed that there was nothing unusual with Mager Manor. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and retracted his spirituality. He then cast his gaze at the bronze cross on the long mottled table. This was an item that the magician and judgment had recently sacrificed. They said that it was to thank Mr. Fool for his blessings, and hope to please this existence. It doesn't look like its level is low. Klein picked up the spiky cross and used divination to quickly figure out the mystical item's beyonder powers and negative effects. Both of them were one and the same. The bronze cross could cleanse powers of degeneration, corruption, corrosion, darkness, evil, ailments and other domains, quickly causing them to dissipate until nothing was left. Due to this reason, this mystical item could also clear the mental corruption of beyonder characteristics. And it was precisely because of this potent purification that the bronze cross couldn't coexist with other mystical items, or be in contact with other Beyonder characteristics. It couldn't exist on the same person. Furthermore, it also repelled the wielder's Beyonder characteristic, albeit not in a manner that was as obvious. Over the passage of time, it would slowly cause a Beyonder's characteristic to seep out. This also meant that if one were to carry or wear the bronze cross for more than an hour, the Beyonder's sequence would drop by at least one sequence. Beyond 3 hours, non-demigods would definitely be reduced to an ordinary person. Exceeding 6 hours, Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 saints would also lose their Beyonder powers. It was almost ineffective against angels because they had the ability to shatter Beyonder characteristics. They had extremely strong control over their source of power. It can be used to retrieve the characteristics of Beyonders who failed to advance without dying or from those who lost control. This cross's powers resemble the sun pathways unshadowed. Klein nodded thoughtfully. Chapter 1033 Let there be Ligh scrutinizing the bronze cross in hand. Klein was certain that it was at least a Grade 1 sealed artifact. Apart from its purifying effects, this mystical item also possessed Flaring Sun and other demigod-level spells of the Sun domain. As for its negative effects, they weren't a problem to resolve if one used it properly. For example, helping people who stumbled into the Beyonder world and hoped to escape this madness to become normal humans again. It could also be used for people who consumed additional potions to secrete the Beyonder characteristic, though this required precise timing. Otherwise, it easily caused one sequence to drop. Of course, the body and soul that had been reconstructed by potions would definitely suffer from frequent conflicts with an ordinary human's essence. Beyonders who relied on this bronze cross to retreat from this circle would undoubtedly suffer residual effects, and the exact circumstances would be different depending on their pathways and sequences. This made Klein sigh. This was the most useful and valuable negative effect he had ever seen. To him, the only problem was that this bronze cross couldn't be carried with him for extended periods of time. He couldn't hand it to his marionette either, as it would expel the marionette's Beyonder characteristic and drop its sequence. And a marionette could no longer consume potions for advancements, as their spirit bodies were essentially dead. As for letting ordinary creatures turn into marionettes, they would praise the sun by wearing this cross for extended periods of time and escape his control. I can only leave it above the gray fog and take it out when I need it. To a bizarro sorcerer, this side effect isn't much. After all, I don't perform unprepared. I'll later confirm if it corresponds to an unshadowed. If it does, I'll sell it to Little Sun after he finishes digesting the Priest of Light potion. I believe that the City of Silver's 6-member council's chief wouldn't be miserly to not exchange it with a sealed artifact of equal value. The Sun pathway is clearly more suitable for the Forsaken Land of the Gods than the other pathways. Klein thought in a good mood as he placed the bronze cross back on the long-modeled table. He didn't immediately make a confirmation, and planned on leaving it until he returned to 160 Buckland Street. When that happens, he would also use dream divination to figure out the origins of the sealed artifact. As Mager Manor was too close to the underground ruins, he was afraid that the royal family's angel, or maybe even Adam, was observing the area. If his experiments were to trigger some change and create a stirring in the gray fog, his biggest secret might be exposed. Even if this sealed artifact doesn't correspond to an unshadowed, it's definitely from the Sun pathway. At most, it's mixed with other Beyonder characteristics. No, it will be expelled, and the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun's trademark is a sacred emblem made of gold, an abstract sun, having nothing to do with a cross. After eliminating this possibility, the only one related to the Sun domain is the City of Silver's creator, the ancient sun god Adam and Amon's dad, the suspected transmigrator. It appeared in the hands of Viscount Stratford. So does this mean that, in a particular sense, it's the Twilight Hermit Order who's cooperating with the royal family, and the psychology alchemists is just a ruse? Of course, there are too many other possibilities. It might have been found by the Augustus family since they're quite a famous angel family in the 4th epoch, and have a long history. Finding certain items of the ancient sun god is rather normal. If this sealed artifact really was provided by Adam, Could it be part of his arrangements? Faced with Demoness Trissy, who is clearly involved with an evil god, and her partner, Viscount Stratford, who chose to use this purifying cross and gave up using other items. That arrangement is very reasonable. Upon deciding to eliminate Gehrman, since he wasn't sure if she had been corrupted by an evil god, and was afraid of accidents happening, he didn't use any direct offensive means, and instead wasted time activating this sealed artifact. That too is also very reasonable. Yes, it's all very reasonable. I'm just not sure if there are signs of this outcome being arranged. With this in mind, my phobia for 0-08 has reared its head again. Yes, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment had privately discussed Adam before. It involved matters regarding the forsaken land of the gods, the giant king's court, and king of angels. This, even if it was arranged by Adam, why does he want to give this item to them? Klein felt his scalp tingle as he thought about it. Composing himself, he decided to do further experiments after returning to Buckland Street. He didn't hesitate and immediately returned to the real world. As for the items on Kona's Kilgore, he relied solely on his divination powers without the Grey Fog's enhancements to gain an initial grasp on the situation. Apart from the Concerto of Light and Shadow which Church of Evernight ascetic leader, Ariana, had taken, and the badge used to open the underground ruins, Kona's Kilgore had two other mystical items. One of them was Rever's Shout of Despair which Rhodes had mentioned. It originated from a failed sacrifice and had two modes. One was an ordinary shot. Its might was slightly weaker than a clown's air cannon. The other was a machine gun sweep. It could spew out large numbers of bullets in 1 to 2 seconds. These two modes came with the Shout of Despair, having a certain level of influence on demigods at the saint level, but it wasn't too effective. Of course, not every demigod could withstand such an attack. Just like Klein himself, he didn't have a ridiculous body or defense to withstand it head-on. The other item was Lucky Grass. It looked very simple, a four-leaved clover that had been made into a protective charm. Its power was to accumulate one's chance of success after a subsequent failed attempt. The negative side effect Klein's appraisal on it was to change its name to Mother of Success. These two mystical items were of little value to Klein. He continued keeping them on Kona's Kilgore's person. Instead, it was this demigod marionette that was his greatest harvest. Lawyers had an acute grasp and knowledge of how to make use of loopholes in law, with the ability to guide and convince the target. Barbarian provided strength and a constitution that broke the rules. Briber had bribe. Baron of Corruption had distortion. Mentor of Disorder had disorder. And Earl of the Fallen had bestowment, magnify, and exploit. They were all pretty good powers. If he hadn't obtained detailed information from Rhodes and made sufficient preparations and formulated a plan, together with the help from an Angel of Concealment, Klein believed that he had no way of restraining Kona's Kilgore, even if he had items like Fate Siphon. In fact, instead of turning him into a marionette, using Creeping Hunger to graze Kona's Kilgore would be a lot more discreet, making it harder to be discovered. But if that's the case, I can only use 3 of the Earl of the Fallen's Beyonder powers. As Klein thought about it, he walked out of the bathroom and returned to the bonfire party. On the lawn, Mocht was standing in front of the roasting rack, trying hard to make East Balham-styled roasted meat while sweat dripped down his forehead. Hazel was standing a short distance away, her eyes looking on brightly. She no longer had the arrogance from before, and had a few black marks across her face, a result of the smoke. Portland Moment was holding a cup of wine, smilingly watching the relatively young lad being busy. From time to time, he would raise a metal skewer with chunks of meat and bite at it. Upon seeing this scene, Klein's heart suddenly calmed down. On Sunday afternoon, the group of people who went to the Buckland Street suburbs returned to Buckland Street. Before dinner, Klein headed above the grey fog once again and picked up the bronze cross. He first confirmed that the cross corresponded to the Sun Pathways sequence for Unshadowed, and had, rather uncreatively, named it Unshadowed Crucifix. Following that, he picked up a pen and wrote a new divination statement. The origins of this cross. Klein didn't immediately divine if Unshadowed Crucifix had any traces of being arranged, afraid that it might point to Adam and place him in a state of vigilance. He planned on investigating the situation by figuring out the sealed artifact's origins. If the unshadowed crucifix's owner or former owner was Adam, the truth of the matter would undoubtedly point towards a deliberate arrangement. Putting down the pen, Klein looked down at the cross and exhaled heavily. I'm courting death again. He suspected that the unshadowed crucifix originated from the City of Silver's creator, the ancient sun god, a powerful deity that was stronger than the ancient gods like Dragon of Imagination. Sneaking a peek at him would cause damage that exceeded Klein's previous divination of Grozel's travels. However, things were no longer the same. Klein was now a sequence for Bizarro sorcerer, a demigod. The damage he could withstand as well as the amount of power of the mysterious space above the gray fog that he could use far exceeded his previous state back when he was a sequence 5. After spending a few seconds to calm his emotions, he leaned back in his chair, holding the unshadowed crucifix in one hand and holding the piece of paper in the other. He softly repeated the divination statement. Over and over again, Klein used cogitation as a jumping board to enter a state of deep sleep. In the hazy world, a building whose original form was obscured by layers of grayish-white stood in a pitch-black environment. Surrounding it were monsters. A crack opened up on the grayish-white building's surface as a palm that had almost white skin reached out. A figure walked out, a man. He wore a black clergyman robe and had a silver crucifix hung on his chest. This man's hair wasn't long and was mainly raven black in color. There was a faint hint of blonde at the roots of his hair. His eyes were pure golden color, and his skin was rather white. He had a deep outline and pronounced eye sockets. He looked quite similar to the people of the northern continent. He took 2 steps forward, reached his hand out, and grabbed the very ordinary crucifix. His eyes gradually lost their look of confusion, as the ends of his lips curled up slightly. He said in a deep voice, "Let there be light." The pitch-black surroundings of the grayish-white building were immediately pierced by bright lights, revealing what it really looked like. This was a deep valley where nothing could be seen above it. Yet the infinite light filled every corner. And there was light. The image of the next scene flashed. A drop of golden blood that emitted light and heat dripped onto the silver cross. Above the drop of blood seemed to be a figure that was formed of dazzling light. The face that he couldn't see clearly was looking up, seemingly being effused with pain and a sense of distortion in a very real manner. He cast his gaze over towards the area above the gray fog, casting it at Klein, who was seated at the fool's high-back chair. His deep voice sounded once again. Mysteries. Suddenly, without any forewarning, Klein's thoughts erupted with a boom. Chapter 1034 gains the boundless gray fog boiled as the ancient and majestic palace burned. The blazing flames condensed into a fiery blob, as though a blinding sun had risen out from this mysterious space. A howling hurricane flipped the long mottled table, snapping the thick stone columns, and causing half the palace to collapse. Sitting at the fool's seat, Klein's brain was boiling before holes exploded out of it. Charred maggots then began crawling out of the cracks. He didn't die, and he had even very calmly reached out his right palm and tapped the armrest of the chair. Above the gray fog, this mysterious space quaked in an obvious manner. Waves of power surged out one after another, calming the hurricane and extinguishing the flames. The blazing sun evaporated inch by inch. The thick stone pillars stood once more as the long mottled table returned to its original state. The magnificent and holy palace appeared as though it had never collapsed or suffered any damage. Klein's head recovered instantly, and the charred maggots that had drilled out had turned transparent again before crawling back inside. As expected, stronger than Dragon of Imagination Anquelt. Klein muttered to himself as his expression couldn't help but warp. He couldn't help but massage his forehead. It's painful. This pain is also clearly stronger. While muttering, he wrapped the edge of the long mottled table and made the mysterious space above the gray fog quake once more. Amidst the quakes, a pitch-black shadow abruptly emerged out of the palace's floor. This shadow twisted and struggled before being wiped clean by the gray fog's powers, leaving nothing behind. After nearly a minute, Klein calmed down completely and recalled the scene he had seen. That should be the ancient sun god, the City of Silver creator, Adam's and Amon's dad. From the crucifix he wore, and that line, "Let there be light," there's a high chance that he is the first transmigrator. Perhaps he's Caucasian with a religious background. He used a language that can stir the powers of nature. It's similar to Jotun, but it's also different. It doesn't belong to Elvish, Dragonese, and ancient Hermes. Yes, it has similarities with the ancient Fasak of the northern continent and the Deutanese of the southern continent. This allowed me to barely understand what he was saying despite me not knowing this language. This is the language he learned from that strange giant building? He transmigrated there and inherited a rich inheritance? The second scene was of him suffering a betrayal, the scene of him being eaten by the kings of angels, white, wisdom, and wind? To a deity who claims to be a creator, that kind of corporeal pain, and that distortion can only appear in such a situation. Yes, the divine blood he dripped before his death fused with the silver crucifix, and it later turned into the latter's form, becoming a rather powerful sealed artifact. From the looks of it, the unshadowed crucifix was obtained by one of the three kings of angels, or it landed in Amon's or Adam's hands. To them, this is an important item their father left behind. The previous possibility isn't too high. The cross's effects are extremely useful. Furthermore, its origins are a secret that needs to be kept. No one would give it to the Augustus family. From the looks of it, was it really arranged by Adam? Why did he give the unshadowed crucifix to Miss Magician, and Miss Judgment in a very reasonable manner? He had discovered that the two ladies believe in the fool after observing them for some time? This cross was meant for the fool that doesn't belong to this era? He wishes to know where his father, who also doesn't belong to that era, came from? But the problem is, how does he plan on raising that question and obtaining an answer? That City of Silver's creator's level is extremely high. He was able to sense my prying despite the long stretch of history between us. He cast his gaze above the gray fog, and cast it on this mysterious space. Furthermore, the influence he created not only openly caused destruction, but also secretly invaded this place, creating a special shadow. It nearly lurked here hidden. Doesn't this mean that, once one obtains the authorities of several domains, a deity's level will also undergo a qualitative change? What does the uttering of mysteries mean? Is it pointing to me, or the original owner of this mysterious space? Questions flashed past Klein's mind, making him come up with several theories, but the final answer eluded him. Due to his fear of Adam, he believed that the best outcome for the unshadowed crucifix was to have the City of Silver's godlike sealed artifact shatter it, and reform it into a pure Beyonder characteristic. Reining in his thoughts and suppressing his questions, Klein conjured a new pen and paper and wrote down the knowledge he had learned from looking straight at the City of Silver creator. Sequence 4. Unshadowed main ingredients. 1 drop of the sun's divine blood, or 3 adult sun divine bird's feathers and a piece of holy brilliance rock. Supplementary ingredients. 60 milliliters of sun divine bird's blood, 30 milliliters of holy brilliance rock liquid, 7 drops of mutated fingered citron juice, 10 grams worth of powder of the heart of magma. Ritual. Extract the strongest emotions that one is most unwilling to abandon before consuming the potion. Inject these emotions back again during this process. Sequence 3. Justice Mentor. Sequence 4. Black Knight. Sequence 3. Trinity Templar. After doing all of this, Klein picked up the bronze cross again and observed it with a heavy expression. He then threw unshadowed crucifix into the junk pile, and stirred the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog to suppress it. He didn't wish to see the paper figurines he cut begin to praise the sun the next time he came. In front of an ordinary house in Sherwood Borough, a postman riding a bike braked and stopped at the door. He then settled down his bike and took out a letter from his bag, glancing to check if the address was correct. "It's here. For Zio." The postman briskly walked to the mailbox and threw the letter in. Following that, he didn't delay as he got on his bike and kicked off. After a while, a pitch-black flame suddenly spewed out of the mailbox's mouth. This flame burned quietly and quickly disappeared. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey, who had brought Susie to the garden for a stroll, had just returned to the foyer when she saw her father, Earl Hall, come in from the outside. He had his brows knitted, seemingly in deep thought. "Father, did something happen?" Audrey asked with concern. This was the most basic of observations which she didn't need to hide at all. Earl Hall restrained his frustrated expression and said with a smile, "It's nothing important. I just never expected Vin Rambus to be a member of a cult." "He's a member of a cult?" Audrey expressed her surprise appropriately. She knew that Vin Rambus was actually a member of the upper echelons of a secret organization, known as the Psychology Alchemists, but she didn't understand how this was suddenly exposed. Earl Hall nodded solemnly. "Yes, he's wanted by the 3 churches. I'm still not sure which cult he's involved in." "Has he been caught?" Audrey's eyes darted around as she asked curiously. No. He disappeared before the warrant was issued. Earl sighed. It's really hard to imagine that he is a cult member. He's of excellent character and is knowledgeable. He's rational and objective in various matters, and is filled with wisdom. That's just the side he wants you to see. Audrey inwardly mumbled. Then, as usual, she entered the small prayer room at home before dinner. She faced the sacred emblem of the Evernight goddess and got into a prayer gesture. However, her low chanting was, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." After chanting the honorific name, Audrey succinctly reported, "Vin Rambus has gone missing. He has been identified as a cultist and is wanted by all 3 churches." With that said, Audrey was about to solemnly pray to the goddess when a boundless gray fog appeared before her. In the middle of the grayish-white fog, a blurry figure sat on the chair, looking down from above and gently nodded. "I'm aware." Just as this secret existence said that, the scene before Audrey's eyes changed suddenly. It presented a figure who was concentrating on praying. "Honorable Mr. Fool, the Church of Evernight has obtained intelligence from Kona's Kilgore, and confirmed that King George III hides an extremely huge secret. For the obtaining of a Blood Emperor ruins in the Sturlwyn segment of the Tussock River, he colluded with the Demonist sect and Psychology Alchemists to partake in human trafficking, creating the human disappearance cases that ultimately led to the Great Smog of Backlund. The Demonist sect's former representative was Despair Nightingale Panatia, and was later changed to Saintess of White Katarina. For the Psychology Alchemists, it's Vin Rambus. Please remind Miss Justice to be careful when she meets Vin Rambus again. She needs to be constantly prepared to seek help. His Majesty." Audrey's eyes widened as upheavals went through her heart. She found it difficult to control herself. This was partly due to the fact that this news was shocking for a noble like her. In addition, it had to do with Ligh, which magnified her emotions. Almost at the same time, a news report flashed in Audrey's mind. It was one that had left an unerasable impression on her. According to preliminary estimates, a total of over 21,000 people died in the smog, and the subsequent plague took the lives of close to 40,000 people. Among the deceased were young children, healthy young men, and women. So that's how it is. What is the king plotting? The 3 churches likely don't have any actual evidence. Otherwise, Father wouldn't only be frustrated to this degree. Audrey felt an inexplicable sense of anger and sadness. It felt like particular principles she had upheld in the past had been ruthlessly trampled, or that values that had stood up to time were silently crumbling. She subconsciously lowered her head and closed her eyes. Then she exhaled and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Fool. Please convey my gratitude to Mr. World." After her prayer, Audrey sat in the tranquil darkness and didn't move for a long time. Chapter 1035 Diary page in Advanced Backlund East Borough, inside a 2-bedroom apartment. Furs picked up a fountain pen and wrote on a piece of paper. This was a letter for her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. It was to tell him that she was in danger and had no choice but to leave where she used to stay. Replies were not to be sent there, and if he had sent a letter, he was to quickly change his address and change identities if possible. After writing plenty of words, Furs put down her pen, folded the letter, stuffed it into an envelope, and adhered a stamp on it. Then, she changed into outdoor attire and left the room with the letter she wanted to send. She wasn't inclined towards heading out, but this new residence of hers not only didn't have alcoholic beverages, but it didn't even have coffee beans, instant coffee, black tea leaves, daily newspapers, the latest magazines, or novels. For these, she had no choice but to personally head out to send the letter and buy some groceries outside East Borough. As for Zio, She had already gone out. She wanted to mail a letter to her former rental apartment, indicating that Viscount Stratford's loyalties lay with the king. She wanted to see if it could drive Gehrman's observer to take certain actions. Seriously, after everything was over, I was so afraid that I nearly forgot to write to teacher. If I had finished it earlier, I could have gotten Zio to do the mailing. Furs wore a bonnet that had a fishnet, walked down the dark staircase all the way to the bottom, and walked out the condominium. This was in the periphery of East Borough where technical workers and low-level managers mainly lived. It was relatively safe and even had paperboys around. As Furs heard chimes from time to time, she walked slowly along the side of the street. At this moment, a postman stopped his bike, took out a stack of newspapers from his bag, and entered a condominium beside her. Furs casually glanced at it and discovered that the copy at the top was News at Sea. People who live here will actually subscribe to such a newspaper? Their job has something to do with maritime trade? Furs retracted her gaze as she mumbled in surprise. However, this wasn't something that was worth paying attention to. She quickly walked towards the mailbox when she saw it at the end of the streets. The postman entered the condominium and found a few targets from the rows of mailboxes, stuffing the corresponding papers into them. Shortly after he left, a mailbox was opened and the newspaper inside was taken out. The person who retrieved the newspapers walked up to the third story, opened a room, and sat in a simple reclining chair, rocking in it as he read through it. By the side of the reclining chair, there was a black wooden table with a stack of papers placed on it. Some of them were stacked neatly with their front page facing up. Some were bent asymmetrically, revealing the articles. On them were the corresponding reports. Shocking. Crazy adventurer made fugitive. Crazy adventurer appears again. An incredible hunt. The man closest to the kings at sea. Adventurer worth £90,000. Story of Gehrman Sparrow and 3 female pirate admirals. Shooting to fame in one battle. Gehrman Sparrow attempts assassination attempt on Vice Admiral ailment at night. Shortly after Furs finished her purchases and returned to her rental apartment, Zio had finished her trip and returned. The reason for their timely return was because it was Monday, and it was almost 3 in the afternoon. Gong. 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 The nearby cathedral's bells resonated as a crimson-red beam of light surged at Furs and Zio at the same moment. Inside the majestic palace, by the sides of the ancient mottled table, figures appeared simultaneously, taking corporeal form. Like always, Justice Audrey stood up first, faced the seat of honor of the long bronze table, curtsied and said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Miss Justice seems rather down. From the looks of it, the news last night is still affecting her. The Fool Klein nodded indiscernibly and acknowledged the Tarot Club members' greetings. At this moment, Audrey, who wasn't in a good mood, noticed with her sharp observational skills that there was a bronze cross beside Mr. Fool's right hand. Where did this cross come from? To be placed on the table by Mr. Fool. It's an item that's at least the level of a card of blasphemy. Who does it originate from? What use does it have? Questions flew through Audrey's mind, making her feel an irresistible sense of curiosity. This was the first time Mr. Fool was placing something in front of him that wasn't a card of blasphemy. Immediately following that, Alger, Catlia, and the other Tarot Club members also noticed the bronze cross that was more eye-catching than a card. Like Miss Justice, they couldn't help but guess at the item's origins, level, and use. Amongst them, Derek felt a subtle calling from it. He felt that the bronze cross was drawing him in. He then recalled a basic rule taught in lessons at the City of Silver. Law of Beyonder Characteristics Convergence. This is a high-level sealed artifact of the Sun Pathway? Derek suddenly came to a realization. Furs and Zio recognized the bronze cross to be the sealed artifacts that they had sacrificed. Their pupils dilated as though they were trying to take a better look. Mr. Fool places so much importance on this item? It's more important than what Zio and I imagined. Furs was stunned and couldn't hide her curiosity. When it came to matters involving gods, her thoughts would never develop towards romance. Zio shared similar thoughts with Furs, but she didn't say a word. She believed that Miss Justice would definitely take the initiative to ask. Just as Audrey was deliberating about raising her hand, Catlia closed her eyes, turned her body, and faced the seat of honor. Before she bowed and spoke, The fool Klein suddenly chuckled. Don't worry. The glasses you conjure can seal your eye of mystery prying. He knew very well that Mam Hermit had already become a demigod by obtaining godhood, turning into a mysticologist. This was partly because Katlia had prayed to the fool before she held the ritual and consumed the potion, hoping to advance under his watch. This way, even if she ultimately failed, she could be blessed and not lose control or go mad. She could always think of expelling the excessive characteristic and redo the attempt. Towards this matter, Klein wasn't too confident about it, because he had never attempted it before. Divination also didn't give any answers, but since he had agreed, he believed that if she failed and didn't die, it was definitely all thanks to Mr. Fool. If she were to lose control or go mad, she wouldn't care if Mr. Fool was really a cheat. In short, Klein's main purpose was to give her confidence so that she was in the best conditions for an advancement attempt. After all, Admiral of Stars wasn't able to find other existences to give similar blessings. After witnessing Mam Hermit's advancement to a demigod, Klein heaved a sigh of relief while lampooning inwardly. At times, acting as a god is harder than acting like a human. When believers encounter trouble, there are usually two outcomes: life or death. Their survival is naturally due to the blessings of deities, and no one would care if death occurs. On the other hand, after becoming a demigod and being able to use more of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, the fool Klein could easily see the astral projections of the Tarot Club members, thus reading their current beyonder pathway and sequence. After sealing her eye of mystery prying, Katlia heaved a sigh of relief and reverently said, "Mr. Fool, there is one page of Emperor Roselle's diary this time." Emperor Roselle's diary? Queen Mystic is done with her matters? But nothing abnormal happened in Backlund. Yes, no one noticed the infiltration of Amon in Backlund Street, or the demigod battle in Mager Manor. The fool Klein nodded in an unperturbed manner and said, "Good. You can think of a question or request." As he spoke, Audrey, Alger, and company sharply learned something from this conversation. Mam Hermit was worried that the glasses she conjured was unable to seal her eye of mystery prying. And this wasn't a worry she had in the previous gatherings. This means that Mam Hermit's eye of mystery prying has been significantly boosted. Why would there be a sudden boost? As she advanced to become a demigod? She's our Tarot Club's second demigod? Audrey connected this matter to Katlia's purchase of the mythical creature's blood, and immediately had a guess. She then swept her gaze at the male members opposite her, and realized that Mr. Hanged Man's seating posture had unknowingly changed. He had apparently figured that Mam Hermit had become a demigod. Little Son's gaze was still staring at the bronze cross without any reaction. The moon Mr. Emlyn hesitated for a few seconds before looking up at Mam Hermit. Mr. Star was like Little Son, his eyes somewhat vacant as though he was waiting for the diary part to pass. "Honorable Mr. Fool, can this question be accumulated with the next one?" Katlia asked. "Accumulated with the next one? Queen Mystic still doesn't want to have her mood affected? Then why would she suddenly provide a diary page? Has she foreseen something?" To maintain his image as the fool, he didn't ask why and nodded gently. "Sure." Katlia didn't speak further as she conjured that diary page, only to see it flash into Mr. Fool's hands. Klein scanned it seemingly casually, taking in most of the information. July 19th. Night of the Blood Moon. Mr. Door's answer allowed me to confirm one thing. In that ancient secret organization, the second blasphemy slate I saw wasn't complete. Chapter 1036 Expected Development. According to Mr. Door, the main difference between the second blasphemy slate and the first blasphemy slate isn't that the latter has many unique sequence names, but that the former had many additions. It was a secret the ancient sun god caught a glimpse of towards his later years. Alright, as a true god, there's no such thing as later years. I'm just using the human concept of the period from his birth to fall, so that would be considered his later years. In other words, the second blasphemy slate's creator was the ancient sun god. Towards this question, Mr. Door answered with almost certainty. He told me that the ancient sun god's fall resulted in the birth of the blasphemy slate. Does that mean that it's considered a key relic of the ancient sun god? Then, Who was the one who created the first blasphemy slate? The original creator, who truly created everything? And what were the additional pieces of knowledge that appeared on the second blasphemy slate? Mr. Dorr didn't answer, only saying that it involves too many secrets. It cannot be explained in just a few words. If he were to return to the real world, he would be able to tell me in detail. Heh, do you think I'll fall for it? As the blasphemy slate was mentioned, I recalled two questions that had been bothering me since a long time ago. What does it mean to be the trend of the times? Who defines the trend of the times? Mr. Dorr's reaction was very odd. He laughed for nearly 20 seconds before telling me, "Be careful of the spectator." What has this got to do with my question? With his reminder, I carefully recalled the contents of the second blasphemy slate and discovered an unusual problem. As a beyonder of the savant pathway, my memory is something I can be proud of due to my eidetic memory. However, I only recalled that sequence O of the spectator pathway is visionary, but I have no impression of its ritual to become a god. I can clearly remember all the rituals for the other 21 pathways, but this is the only one where not only do I lack an impression of, I have even subconsciously neglected it. I tried asking Mr. Dorr what the ritual is for becoming a god for the spectator pathway. Mr. Dorr laughed and said with a teasing and leisurely tone, "Didn't you already say it? The ritual for a spectator to become a god is to make the development of the times to be in line with one's expectations. Then consume the potion for their advancement when it's at a certain time node in that trend? I believe that's the truth. Compared to the times as part of the original creator. Only when the times develop according to a certain expectation can he draw energy from it and revive. This seems more objective. I knew that among the founders of that ancient secret organization, there had to be someone with their plans apart from the zealots. On careful thought, this is really quite a terrifying matter. It's fine when stuck in the low and mid-beyonder levels, but once someone is of a high standing, they might suffer an unknown and sudden destruction simply because their particular thoughts, ideas, or matters that they would like to push forward disagrees with a particular existence's expectations. Be careful of the spectator. I'm very curious how Mr. Dorr knows what's on the second blasphemy slate, as well as the various rituals needed to become a god. His answer was that he had seen the complete second blasphemy slate, and with him were Solomon, Zeratul, Tudor, Trunsoest, Augustus, Einhorn, Sauron, Castilla, Zoroast, Stiano, Constantine, and company. These were families who reigned over all the Beyonders in the fourth epoch. The secrets contained in this diary page made Klein feel as though he was facing a mythical creature's form, embroiling his mind in a storm of knowledge. The spectator's ritual to become a god is to make the times develop according to one's imagination? If that's the case, Adam has been subconsciously preparing for this since the beginning of the fourth epoch. So the secret that King George III is hiding, and the possible developments, are in line with his expectations to the point of him giving a helping hand? Once the tide of the times come rushing in, with things not being capable of changing in short time spans, he will be able to become a god? In that case, engaging in a deep investigation of the Great Smog is abnormally dangerous. Even if I'm currently a blessed of the goddess, having an official Beyonder's background, and being able to cooperate with angels anytime, my safety can't be guaranteed. After all, the goddess isn't able to descend for quite some time. Amidst his thoughts, Klein suddenly had the intention of cowering back. If this were in the past, he could relax after reporting the matter to the Church of Evernight, and even leave Backlund for a vacation. But now, as a blessed of the goddess, he had already promised to seek out Venrambus and Saintess of White Katarina, making it very difficult for him to escape. It was truly a case of you win some, you lose some. Furthermore, Klein didn't know how Adam wished for the times to develop. If a great smog of Backlund happened again, he really had no way of extricating himself. There were people he cared about, and he yearned for peace. At the very least, I have to know what the king's secret is before deciding what to do. On the second blasphemy slate, apart from the Beyonder pathways and sequence potion, what are the secrets it has? Klein retracted his gaze and made Roselle's diary page vanish. Then he looked around with a calm expression and said with a smile, "You may begin." At this moment, Audrey didn't hide her curiosity. She raised her hand slightly and asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, is there any special meaning to the cross beside your hand?" If the answer requires an equivalent exchange, you can directly make the request. Klein placed the unshadowed crucifix on the table precisely because he wanted the Tarot Club members to ask. He could then use this opportunity to inform Little Sun and the Hanged Man, who might have a chance of using the cross, of the news. After all, such matters were beneath Mr. Fool to expect him to raise them. Therefore he smiled at Miss Justice. This question is nothing. It's something left behind by the sun god of ancient times. Sun god of ancient times. Ancient sun god? The creator that the City of Silver believes in? This cross actually has such origins. A captain of the Royal Guards whose Justice Sequence 5 or 6 actually had a relic of the ancient sun god on him. Isn't that too much a coincidence? Furs couldn't believe her ears when she heard Mr. Fool's answer. At this moment, the Fool Klein mentioned in passing. Its level isn't too high, corresponding to an unshadowed. Its greatest use is to eliminate the mental corruption of beyonder characteristics, and help people who have consumed excessive potions to expel the excess characteristics. It will allow those who do not wish to remain in the mysterious world to return to normalcy. This power is rather fascinating. It's no wonder Mr. World once asked me if given a chance, will I be willing to completely leave the mysterious world? Audrey felt that her curiosity was satisfied. Strange. It really is an item that makes me uncomfortable. Emlyn made a judgment as he looked to the side at the sun. Derek was surprised and delighted, having a feeling that he had his dream fulfilled. His dream was to free all the residents of the City of Silver from the curse and return under the sun, and not constantly suffer the madness, pain and torture. And if such a dream could be fulfilled by the relic inherited from the ancient sun god, the creator who the City of Silver believed in, it would truly appear to be destiny and inevitable. He spoke before the Hanged Man. "Honorable Mr. Fool, can I find a way to trade for this item?" "As long as you pay a sufficient price," Klein said with a slight nod. "Mr. Fool really is the best, the greatest," Derek praised from the bottom of his heart. "As long as a sufficient price is paid." Alger gained inspiration from Miss Magician's rental of the notebook and hurriedly asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, is it possible to rent the cross for a day or a few hours for a fixed price?" He currently didn't have any plans on renting it. As his Windblessed potion had digested relatively quickly, he planned on considering the problem of purging the excess characteristic after he consumed the additional Ocean Songster potion. "Yes," the Fool Klein answered simply. "It can be rented?" The Star Leonard had benefited quite significantly from borrowing Lamino's travels previously. After he heard Mr. Fool's answer, he focused, seriously thinking if he had any need for the ancient sun god's relic. Chapter 1037 Gehrman's Problem. After hearing Miss Justice, Derek very enthusiastically replied, "Our City of Silver's warehouse likely has the complete brain of an adult mind dragon. I'll inform you after confirming it when I return." He originally wanted to say that even if there was the complete brain of an adult mind dragon, it was most likely filled with madness and distorted mental corruption, but after seeing the bronze cross, he felt that it wasn't a problem. That simple? Audrey's eyes lit up when she heard that. Her depressed mood from last night had brightened up significantly. Indeed, compared to the outside world where dragons are decreasing in number, the City of Silver, which has a history dating back to the Second Epoch, will likely possess such ingredients. It's mainly because they do not have the higher sequences formula for the spectator pathway, so even with the ingredients, they are of little use. Furthermore, they lack an artisan and are unable to turn beyonder ingredients into mystical items. At times, they'd rather just store them. Many thoughts ran through Audrey's mind as she asked with a faint smile, "If you do have it, what would you exchange it for?" "I haven't thought of it." Derek felt a little embarrassed as he raised his hand and scratched the back of his head. His main goal now was to obtain the creator's relic from Mr. Fool, but he didn't have anything of equal value. In the past, he would definitely be worried, but now, he quickly came up with an idea despite his worries. He decided to ask the chief because he was certain that the chief was interested in the creator's relic. Due to having such thoughts, he really didn't know what payment he needed from Miss Justice. He planned on figuring out the other matter before telling her. Alright, confirm it first. It's best if you can check if there's any blood of an adult mind dragon. Audrey didn't press as she nodded gently. It was the hardest supplementary ingredient she needed in the Dreamwalker potion formula. Audrey immediately looked around, indicating that she was done. You don't have to look at me. Although I do have some savings, there's nothing I wish to buy. It mainly has to do with teacher not having given me the Traveler's Potion formula. Among the first 5 sequences of Apprentice, I like Traveler the most. I've always been looking forward to heading to different places to take in their vistas and delicacies. But thinking of the long journey, the crowdedness or crude transportation tools, and the inns whose level of hygiene is questionable, I'll definitely be obstructed by all the bulky baggage. After I become a traveler, these won't be a problem. Furza's thoughts gradually wandered as she fantasized about her future life. Zio pondered for a moment and said, Everyone, please look out for the potion formula for the Arbiter Pathways Sequence 6 Judge and Sequence 5 Disciplinary Paladin. She had a chance of obtaining the Judge formula from her MI9 contact, but she believed that Viscount Stratford's death would definitely cause a storm in Backland. And when that happened, many things might change. Therefore, she planned on getting the Tarot Club to make additional preparations. After all, it was only for them to be on the lookout and not to search for them. Besides, at Sequence 6 and 5, that would make her a quasi-high-ranking member of MI9. For informants in the peripheral to apply for the potion formula, there was a high probability that she needed to undergo a new round of investigations. This wasn't something she could skip because of the contact who had been very friendly to her. To Zio, who was anxious to advance to a high-sequence Beyonder and figure out the secret of the king, she undoubtedly couldn't place her hopes in the military. All right. Alger was the first to reply. Due to the influence from the royal family and the military, the Church of Storms likely had some of the potion formulas of the Arbiter Pathway. Of course, this wasn't something a Sequence 6 captain responsible for acting as a pirate would know. He only had a chance of knowing them after he officially became a Sequence 5, and was summoned back to the church, or was assigned to deal with more important missions. Following that, Catlia said, the potion formula of the Arbiter Pathway is strictly controlled by the Lone and Phaenopotter royal families and military. They seldom appear in the wild. However, I can try to help you obtain it, but not able to guarantee you success. Also, if you need it, I can provide you with a Judge Pathways mystical item. After its shattering and reformation, it will become the corresponding main ingredient. When she mentioned the words shattering and reformation, Catlia subconsciously thought of turning her body sideways as a hint to misjudgment that she could seek Mr. Fool's help, but ultimately she held back. As for the method to obtaining the potion formula, it was actually very simple. It was to take the initiative to listen to the ravings of the hidden sage, and accept the knowledge he imbued. At Sequence 4, her level of tolerance as a demigod had undergone a qualitative change. However, the hidden sage was definitely not an existence that lacked intelligence. He could attach negative influences in the knowledge in his ravings, and even send his powers down from above, corrupting the listener. Therefore, such actions were still dangerous. Catlia had the courage to attempt it, not because she was rash and overly confident, but because she was a member of the Moses Ascetic Order. As an ancient organization that believed in the hidden sage, the Moses Ascetic Order's upper echelons had gradually found a relatively safe method to listen, while under this existence's influence. Likewise, the hidden sage didn't have a ridiculous level of malicious intent towards members of the Moses Ascetic Order. He seldom brought harm, and most of the time, he was simply imbuing knowledge and letting them pursue his believers. To her, as long as she controlled the frequency and quantity, she could obtain knowledge from the hidden sage in a rather safe manner. As for the tiny influence and corruption that came with it, she suspected that the process of entering the area above the gray fog every time she participated in the tarot gathering allowed them to be eliminated in a natural and simple manner. The only problem was that the knowledge she received each time wasn't something under her control. It depended on the hidden sage's mood and thoughts at that particular point in time. In a sense, this was a passive and irresistible secret deed ritual. As for the Judge Pathway mystical item that she was willing to provide, It came from the Fogsea's strongest hunter Anderson, a button. After she became a demigod, some of the items she held had little use. One of them was the button. After hearing that, Zio didn't hesitate to agree. All right, I'll consider purchasing it after obtaining the Judge Potion formula. I hope I can raise my sequence again by then, allowing me to use the Grey Fog's powers that isn't just close to the level of an angel, but that of an angel. Only then can I shatter items and let the characteristic reform. Otherwise, I'll still have to bother Ma'am Ariana or Willa Septon. Yes, if Mr. Azik were to awaken, things would be a lot simpler. I wonder if the unshadowed crucifix can purge an item's beyonder characteristic out. I don't think it will work. It can't coexist with those items, preventing them from even coming close. Other than this restriction, it should be possible in theory. I'll later try to use the Grey Fog's powers to force the unshadowed crucifix to be bound to other mystical items. Klein, who was listening by the sidelines, thought. After discussing Miss Judgment's matter, the other members didn't seem to have any needs to make a transaction. Leonard had already covered up the weaknesses of his mystical item. Alger was working hard to become legal. Derek was only thinking of the creator's relic. Emlyn and Katlia had just advanced recently, so they had nothing they needed for now. Amongst them, Katlia had the intention of renting the cross to see if she could cleanse the remnant corruption in Artisan Sealf. However, the Roselle diaries she gathered came from Queen Mystic and were used for obtaining answers. She believed she was temporarily unable to produce anything that would gain Mr. Fool's interest. I'll try to gather the Emperor's diary out at sea. Katlia secretly made the decision. After some thought, Emlyn said to the magician, "Ma'am, in the next 2 weeks, I might need to rent that notebook." "No problem." Furs was originally thinking of spending money to get Mr. Moon to add abyss shackles and other beyonder powers to the spellbook, so she was very happy to permit his request. This meant, not only would she not be spending money, but she would even earn some money. At this thought, she couldn't help but add, "Try not to record full moon." She would be very troubled if Lamino's Travels' powers were mainly filled with full moon. While Emlyn nodded in agreement, Alger interrupted as though in thought. "Is the Sanguine's hunting of the key members of the Rose School of Thought about to begin?" "Yes." Emlyn didn't hide the truth at all. "Once the plan is finalized, I'll get everyone to provide me with suggestions." "No problem." The first to answer wasn't the hanged man, but the world Gehrman sparrow who had been sitting silently at the bottom end of the long bronze table. "He's interested in this?" Not only did Emlyn think this, but the other members also had the same idea no matter how slow they were. With the hanged man, the hermit, and Justice agreeing to help Mr. Moon in plotting the Sanguine operation, the Tarot Club's transaction segment came to an end, ushering in the free communication segment. The world Gehrman sparrow sat up slightly and looked at the star Leonard. "Help me ask if that person has seen the second blasphemy slate." "Blasphemy slate?" Audrey and the other members immediately grasped the peculiar term. They immediately had astonished thoughts. The second blasphemy slate? Mr. Star isn't as simple as he appears. He knows someone that has seen one of the most important items in mythical legend. Other than his identity as a member of the church and official Beyonder, he had other secrets. No wonder he has joined the Tarot Club. Leonard jumped in fright as well, never expecting Klein to raise such a request. After a few seconds of silence, he exhaled and said, "Okay." Chapter 1038 Name Lease. After answering, Leonard snapped to his senses and grasped the hidden message contained in Klein's request. Does he mean that old man has once seen something like the blasphemy slate? Without giving Leonard the chance to think, the world Gehrman sparrow surveyed the area and mentioned something else. The Church of Evernight has confirmed that lone King George III hides a particular secret from the intel they received from MI9's deputy director, Brigadier General Konas Kilgore. He secretly sent people to dig up the Blood Emperor's ruins and colluded with the Demonist sect and psychology alchemists. Klein controlled the fake person and described the matter which he had previously told Miss Justice in greater detail. After he was done, he made special mention. The three churches don't seem to have found enough evidence. With Vin Rambise's disappearance, the matter seems to have calmed on the surface. There is reason to suspect that there's a traitor amongst the upper echelons of the three churches. Something so major actually happened in Backlund this week? Klein seems to have obtained information from the church. Why don't I know any of that? As he listened, Leonard shot a look at the world Gehrman sparrow with an odd expression. He temporarily had his thoughts adrift, unsure as to who was the red gloves of the Church of Evernight, and a target who was about to become a high-ranking member to be nurtured. Recalling the past, he seemed to grasp something, but he was unable to fully grasp that spark of inspiration and develop the idea fully. Zio, who had planned on sharing her encounter with Viscount Stratford and his testimony at the Tarot Club and seek assistance, was stunned to realize that the matter Mr. World was investigating overlapped greatly with her goals. If I had known this would happen, I would have sought Mr. World's help when following Viscount Stratford to the dock area. We might have been able to circumvent the restrictions and obtain more clues. Zio looked around and deliberated over her words, preparing herself to speak. At this moment, while Alger was feeling shocked, he connected it to the period 3 to 4 months ago, a period before the Star and Judgment had joined the Tarot Club. Back then, the World Gehrman Sparrow had requested the Tarot Club members to help take note of information regarding Kona's Kilgore, and he had accused Vin Rambus of being the mastermind behind Quarren's suicide. Indeed, a simple suicide case by Quarren wouldn't make the world expend so much of his time and energy. Matters he's investigating and the people he takes note of are very likely secrets that have an influence on the global situation. Also, there might be a traitor amongst the three churches' upper echelons. Which cardinal or high-ranking deacon could it be? Alger could sense the surging undercurrents and the scent of an opportunity. Normally, he wasn't someone the Church of Storms placed a great importance on. The best outcome of a Beyonder who acted as a pirate for prolonged periods of time was to become a Sequence 5 ocean songster. After returning to the church, they could become an assistant to the mandated Punisher's upper echelons. It was almost impossible for them to wield holy artifacts and become demigods. Only with the situation changing and through frequent developments could he rely on the Tarot Club to showcase his capabilities and make great contributions. That way, he would be made a target to be nurtured. Likewise, Katlia seemed to see the dark clouds accumulating in Backlund, as well as the strong winds brewing there. She vaguely understood why the Queen had been staying in Backlund over the past half-year. As for Emlyn, he frowned, feeling once again that Backlund was no longer a safe place for the Sanguine to live in. I can only hope that it doesn't affect my hunting operation of the key members of the Rose School of Thought. Also, I hope it doesn't make Father and me be that busy like the period after the Great Smog last year. Emlyn's frown deepened upon recalling that episode. He swept his gaze from the corner of his eye at the sun, and discovered that the youth was sitting upright, his eyes vacant. He couldn't help but scoff inwardly. I will take note of Vin Rambise's whereabouts. Audrey broke the temporary silence. Judgment Zio also looked at the World Gehrman Sparrow and said, I'm investigating a matter that involves the king's secret. If you need my assistance, please don't stand on ceremony. Having said that, she briefly mentioned the problem of someone monitoring Gehrman. All right. Klein knew that it was Demonis Trissy and made the fake person, the world, nod and chuckle hoarsely. Be it taking note of Vin Rambise's whereabouts or investigating the king's secret, take note of any matters that seem too coincidental around you. If there are any coincidences, immediately inform me. He didn't directly mention the Twilight Hermit Order or Adam, afraid that Miss Justice and company couldn't help but think about it in private and be overly anxious. If they were to reveal any problems, they might attract unneeded attention. Too many coincidences. Furs and the other Tarot Club members repeated this phrase in their minds as they made their own guesses. After about 10 seconds of silence, Derek said, I'll be following the expedition team to the afternoon town camp after a period of making preparations and adjustments. This time we might attempt to enter the Giant King's court. To Audrey and company, this wasn't something too sudden. They had long known that the City of Silver would launch such an operation after the sun advanced to Sequence 5. Therefore they weren't shocked or surprised. Instead, they had the feeling that their patience had paid off, as though a mythical legend was about to unfold before them in a real, corporeal manner. Alger thought and gave a vague reminder. When the time comes, listen to your chief's arrangements and try your best to pray to Mr. Fool frequently. If you're stumped, you can request a mini-gathering for a discussion like the moon. All right, Mr. Hanged Man. Derek had no problems with that since those were things he usually did or thought of doing. After this matter was over, Alger turned to the seat of honor at the end of the bronze table and reverently said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have the answer to the matter you wanted me to investigate." Under the other members' looks of puzzlement and curiosity, he continued, "There were 5 Faceac colonels who participated in the Konotop Sea battle in 1338. 2 of them died in battle, and 1 died 2 years ago due to excessive drinking after being discharged due to age. 1 was promoted to Commodore and was transferred to the Imperial Navy College and became its Vice-Chancellor. 1 became a Rear Admiral and is currently serving as commanding officer of the Faceac Subjugation Fleet's 2nd Squadron." Just as he said that, Alger requested for the right to conjure a piece of paper filled with the detailed intel. The Fool Klein allowed it to flash in his palm and quickly scanned through it. He had made the Hanged Man investigate the Faceac and Mat's colonel in the 1338 Konotop Sea battle, mainly to seek out Creeping Hunger's original owner. That naval officer had captured the Inmat's second mate, Andy Hayden, in that sea battle and grazed him. He was one of the absolute victors, so it was impossible for him to have died in battle. As for his subsequent discovery and encounter in that primitive island with the Hanged Man, they made Klein suspect that Kalangos had been given the glove by the Twilight Hermit Order. Be it an official or periphery member, it's impossible for him to die that easily or die from alcoholism. Of course, I can't eliminate the possibility of being silenced. Klein thought quickly and remembered 3 names on the piece of white paper. Boris. Died in 1347. Cause of death. Excessive drinking. Suzdal. 48 years old. Commodore. Faceac Imperial Navy College's Vice-Chancellor. Dmitriev. 45 years old. Rear Admiral. Commanding Officer of Faceac Subjugation Fleet's 2nd Squadron. Retracting his gaze, the Fool Klein nodded gently and said to the Hanged Man, "Continue gathering detailed information of the latter 3. Figure out everything about their lives." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Alger agreed without hesitation. This was an opportunity for him. After the mission was completed, he could attempt to request to borrow the cross. After another round of exchanges, the week's tarot gathering came to an end. Leonard then returned to the real world. Sitting on the sofa, he hesitated for a moment before placing his feet on the coffee table. Then he asked with a suppressed voice, "Old man, have you seen the 2nd blasphemy slate before?" In his mind, Pallas Zoros' slight-aged voice sounded. "No. The one who saw the 2nd blasphemy slate was my great-grandfather." "Haha, who mentioned this?" Leonard didn't answer Pallas Zoros' question as thoughts resonated in his mind. The blasphemy slate really exists. Old man's great-grandfather had seen the 2nd blasphemy slate. No wonder he could become an angel. After a few seconds, Leonard asked curiously and expectantly, "Old man, do you know the potion formula of Night Watcher?" Pallas Zoros immediately scoffed. "Naive. According to my great-grandfather, it was an urgent situation and a limited opportunity. The blasphemy slate could disappear at any moment. Any smart person will know to grasp a complete beyonder pathway before looking at the rest. In addition, the knowledge of the blasphemy slate appeared in its essence and not in textual form. Everyone who saw it needed some time to interpret it. When the blasphemy slate was taken away, not everyone managed to memorize a complete beyonder pathway. So how could they care about the others? I do have quite a number of potion formulas of the other pathways, but they were slowly gathered by the family over long periods of time. There aren't many high-sequence formulas among them." "Is that so?" Leonard chuckled dryly and asked, "Who took the 2nd blasphemy slate away?" Pallas Zoros fell silent for a second before saying, "If my great-grandfather's description isn't wrong, that should be King of Angels Adam." "The 7 deities, no, it should have only been 6 deities back then, didn't participate in this matter?" Leonard pressed in puzzlement. Pallas Zoros laughed in an ambiguous manner. "At least not on the surface." Chapter 1039. Hope. A bolt of lightning streaked across the deep, dark sky. illuminating the entirety of the City of Silver. However, it didn't last too long, and it soon disappeared into the darkness, returning the world to its pitch-black state. After Derek Berg opened his eyes, he immediately got off the bed and dashed for the door. He slowed down his pace as he walked, his expression clearly conflicted. How should I mention the creator's relic to the chief? Directly tell the chief that an item has caught my eye? No. Although, according to Mr. Hanged Man, the chief has a tacit understanding towards such matters, I can't be too direct. Derek was always a thin-skinned youth. Even when his parents were alive, he seldom made requests for items. He paused in place, seriously trying to recall the discussions with Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and the rest of the Tarot Club members, hoping to imitate them and find a reasonable excuse. After simulating the possible developments all day, Derek bit his lip and decided to be direct. Carrying Thunder God's roar, he pulled open the door, entered the streets, and headed for the Twin Towers that was north of the city. Along the way, many City of Silver residents came out of their houses, wearing smiles as they gathered at the training field. This period of time was the harvesting season for Blackface Grass, a festival for the City of Silver to offer sacrificial offerings to the Creator. It was also one of the rare days when people could feel happy deep down in a darkness with harsh survival conditions. Seeing Seamdren who were skipping about and adults wearing Blackface Grass amulets and rings while hearing their discussions and singing, Derek's heart calmed down as his footsteps grew firmer. Coming to the spire of the Twin Towers, he passed the message and met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad, in a particular room at the top of the tower. This demon hunter was messy and grizzled as always, having not put effort into combing it. The wrinkles on his face were rather deep, leaving behind either deep or distorted old scars. His light blue eyes were deep with experience, as though they could see through a person. After Derek saluted him, he nodded and said, "How's your grasp of the Priest of Light potion?" This was referring to the spirituality convergence and the corresponding familiarity with the various theurgical spells. Derek answered in a frank manner, "Almost grasped it. Yes, there's no rush. The other members of the expedition team have yet to make preparations. They still need a certain amount of time, just like Lovia. She's gathering and searching for the ingredients needed for her advancement." Colin Iliad gave a casual mention. Indeed, Elder Lovia will also participate in the expedition to the Giant King's court. She's trying to become a demigod. Derek was taken aback as he asked without hiding anything, "Elder Lovia has the subsequent potion formula?" This was a problem that had plagued the shepherd elder all this time, preventing her from becoming a demigod for years. Yes. Colin gave an affirmative answer, but he didn't provide an explanation. He instead asked, "Is there something this time?" Derek turned anxious when he heard this. He didn't make a request, but rather directly said, "Your Excellency, I discovered a relic of the Creator. It corresponds to the sequence 4 unshadowed of the Sun pathway." The tall and muscular Colin in a linen shirt narrowed his eyes as the look in his eyes changed. Those complex and indescribable emotions made Derek freeze on the spot, causing him to momentarily forget what he was about to say next. Amidst an indescribable silence, Demon Hunter Colin said in a deep voice, "Relic." Derek's pupils constricted as he realized that he accidentally mentioned something of great significance. He had felt pain that the Creator had been eaten for a very long time, knowing that he had completely fallen, never to return again. This made him develop the illusion that it was common sense. Faced with the chief's question and gaze, Derek fell silent, momentarily at a loss for an explanation. He hesitated for a few seconds and finally opened his mouth with great difficulty. "Yes, Relic. The kings betrayed the Lord." He subconsciously used the term the ecclesiastic at Afternoon Town had used in referring to the kings of angels. Colin looked at Derek, his light blue eyes seemingly losing focus temporarily. This demon hunter remained silent for a long while, and after nearly a minute did he calmly say, "Got it." His voice subconsciously turned deeper. He didn't ask where the relic of the Creator that Derek had discovered, or what it looked like and what its use was. His eyes regained their depth as he didn't continue the topic. Instead, he said, "You've already become a Sequence 5. You have the right to know what holy sealed artifacts the City of Silver has. Once you're able to converge your spirituality and fully grasp the theurgical spells, I'll give you the corresponding information and take you to the place where they're sealed. If you have an affinity with one of the holy sealed artifacts and can reduce its negative effects, you can wield one. The affinity he mentioned here referred to the similarity between Derek's psyche and the remnant high sequence Beyonder's psyche mark on the sealed artifact. It could reduce the terrifying negative effects by deceiving it to a certain degree. In the City of Silver, there wasn't a lack of common Beyonder characteristics and ingredients. Furthermore, everyone knew the acting method. The only thing preventing them from advancing was the rituals. At times, without a potion formula, it didn't stop a Sequence 8 from advancing to Sequence 7, or Sequence 7 to 6. As long as one had advanced correctly via consuming potions the previous time, and had completely digested it, if one was willing to take the risk, they could attempt to directly consume a Beyonder characteristic to advance. The chances of success weren't too low, but from Sequence 6 to 5, without the help of a ritual, the chances of success were very low. Therefore, in the City of Silver, there were a lot of Sequence 6 Beyonders, but Sequence 5 and up became rare. It was a level that earned serious considerations. Why did the chief suddenly mention this? He means that I can choose a holy sealed artifact to exchange for the Creator's relic. I haven't even mentioned this yet. Yes, I'll first offer the information to Mr. Fool and see which item will please him. Derek was stunned for a moment before he came to a realization. He nodded heavily. Yes, Your Excellency. He didn't say anything else as he bade farewell and prepared to participate in the harvest. Demon Hunter Colin watched his figure disappear as he slowly walked to the window and cast his gaze at the altar near the training field. There were already many people gathered there. They were circling the Creator's altar, and they were using ancient dances to please the deity. Others were singing praises of the mighty existence. They had obvious smiles on their faces, their eyes brimming with hope and anticipation. It was as if the Creator would return if they held on for a few more years, and all hardships would come to an end. Such expectations had been repeatedly shattered in the past 2 to 3 millennia, but it rose up, again and again, to support their hearts in resisting the despair and burdens. Colin Iliad stood by the window and watched intently. Backlund, Clun Street. After returning from above the gray fog to the real world, Klein's heart felt heavy. Emperor Roselle's diary page allowed him to understand the secrets of the spectator. He understood how dangerous it would be for him to continue investigating the king. Even with the Church of Evernight and the goddess's blessings, it wouldn't be completely safe. It mainly has to do with the goddess's digesting of the death pathway's uniqueness. She won't be able to descend for quite a long period of time. I hope the Lord of Storms and the God of Steam and Machinery can react in a timely manner at the critical moment. Regardless, with Mam Ariana, Willa Septon and Pallas Zorost, even against a king of angels, it isn't an outcome that spells certain doom. Even if I were to die, they still have a chance of grabbing my corpse. The longer I hold on, the higher the odds of my survival will increase. Klein relieved his stress by making a self-deprecating comment. Previously, above the gray fog, he had already decided the focus of his investigation. It was to pursue Saintess of White Katarina and Demoness Trissy, whose current sequence was unknown. As for Vin Rambus, as long as he didn't take the initiative to contact Miss Justice, he wouldn't try to seek him out. Otherwise, he might encounter an accident he couldn't fend off. On the one hand, I'm waiting for Miss Judgment's feedback, and on the other hand, I should try to see if I can find Vice Admiral Ailment. By using their blood connection, I can try to lock onto the Saintess of White. This isn't too realistic. The 3 churches will definitely come up with this method, so the Demoness sect will definitely counter this. I'll later get Danitz to search for items related to Vice Admiral Ailment, and I'll use the Grey Fog's ability to interfere and screen. Yes, I'll also ask him about Anderson. This isn't too pressing. The unshadowed crucifix is still being experimented with. Klein retracted his thoughts and got out of bed. He had already used the Grey Fog's suppression to bind unshadowed crucifix and the mystical item, Broken Finger, together. He wanted to see if the Beyonder characteristic would be purged. After resting at home for a while, Klein changed his clothes and went out with his valet, Inuni. He planned on praying at St. Samuel Cathedral before visiting the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation. This valet wasn't actually the winner, but Kona's Kilgore. The real Earl of the Fallen had been turned into flesh with the flower of blood, and was hiding inside the Earl of the Fallen's stomach. Backlund's weather these days was often gloomy. The gas lamps lining the two sides of the road had yet to be lit up, but the houses on both sides of the street had already been lit up. Klein watched all of this expressionlessly. He rode his carriage from Backlund Street to Phelps Street. He first headed to St. Samuel Cathedral to pray before he wore his top hat and cane, and walked to the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation. As he approached the door, he heard a ringing sound. He saw Miss Audrey riding a modified bicycle which didn't have a horizontal bar, and was rather exquisite. She had come out from an alley. She was wearing a plain white dress and a pair of black leather shoes. Her blonde hair was tied up as her green eyes were peeled on the road. Sitting on the seat harness behind her was a golden retriever, who could maintain her stability, no matter how much the bicycle shook. Upon noticing the elegant gentleman with white sideburns, Audrey smiled brightly and greeted in a cheery tone. "Good morning, Mr. Dantes." "Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. You seem to be in a good mood?" Klein watched as she hit the brakes and used her foot to support herself. Audrey pursed her lips as her smile brightened a little. "You're right. I am indeed in a good mood. After riding this for a while, all my troubles have disappeared." Chapter 1040. The tranquil surface of the sea. Not bad. A spectator's ability to adjust their own emotions are rather impressive, Klein commented inwardly as he looked at the golden retriever on the back seat of the bicycle. He then sized up the bicycle that looked different from the bicycles on the street. He casually asked, "Is this a new bike designed specially for women?" "What do you mean specially designed for women? If you wish to ride it, you can too," Audrey replied with a smile. "I only told the people at the bike company that they needed to consider the requirements of the different demographics. This is their latest product they designed. It has yet to be industrialized. I was given a prototype to give them some feedback." "An excellent idea," Klein praised with a smile before asking thoughtfully, "Do you know the owner of the Backlund Bike Company?" Audrey's eyes narrowed a little as she answered, "Of course, I'm one of the major shareholders of the Backlund Bike Company." "Major shareholder? I almost forgot about that. She ultimately succeeded." Klein seemed to understand something as the corners of his lips curled up slightly as he shook his head in a self-deprecating manner. "I see. My imagination still isn't good enough. How is it? How does it feel after riding it?" Audrey held the bicycle's handles and darted her eyes about slightly, recalling as she said, "It's great. It's very suitable for women." "Honorable lady, that wasn't what you said a moment ago." Klein pricked his brows, but he didn't interrupt the girl. Audrey smiled and continued, "To me, it can help me adjust my mood and relieve stress. It's like riding a horse. However, that requires special equipment, and I have to do it at the horse ranch in the suburbs. It's impossible to get the horse to gallop at full speed at home or on the streets. It lacks that feeling, but bicycles don't have that problem. I can even head into the alleys which horse carriages can't enter. It allows me to take in different sights. Just now, I rode past a house and saw their garden blooming with flowers. It made me feel especially happy. Oh, when I encountered other people on bicycles, I feel very happy too. They work hard to live, carrying that little bit of hope. Although they're busy and in a rush, they don't appear listless." "All right, don't laugh at me. I know you want to say that those who can afford bicycles are definitely not those at the lowest rungs of society. I'm just happy for them. I hope that one day, I can ride through every street in Backlund." Klein listened quietly as his mood improved. With Miss Justice's description, it seemed possible for the scene to appear in front of him. And this was a trivial change he had brought to this world. He laughed and said, "No, I have no way of refuting it. It sounds very interesting. This is what I wish to see in Backlund. The more the merrier." "I originally had doubts about certain things, but now, I seem to have fewer doubts." With that said, he pointed at 22, Phelps Street, the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation's door. "Let's go in. It looks like it's going to rain soon." All right, I'll park the bicycle. Audrey got off the bicycle and pushed it and her golden retriever towards the back door. There was a parking spot for bicycles which had been specially demarcated. It was indoors, so there was no need to be afraid of the rain. In an organization like the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, more and more of the staff who often needed to travel deep into East Borough were beginning to ride bikes. Of course, none of them dared to venture too deeply into East Borough on such a transportation tool, as everything could be stolen there. As they approached the back door, Susie jumped off the bicycle. She turned back to look at the spot from before and said in puzzlement, "Audrey, that Mr. Dante's person had a mixed tone when he heard you say that you were one of the major shareholders of the bicycle company, but I failed to decipher his true meaning." Audrey pursed her lips and chuckled. "I previously heard that Mr. Dante's was one of the people who attempted to compete with Hibbert for buying the shares of the bicycle company. I get it now." Susie revealed an obvious smile and felt happy for the accuracy of her observation. Inside the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, Klein very gentlemanly waited until Miss Audrey returned with her Beyonder dog, and followed them to the second floor. At this moment, a staff came forward and said to Audrey, "Director, Chancellor Portland Moment from the Backlund University of Technology is waiting for you in the reception room." "Why is Chancellor Moment here?" Audrey asked in surprise. The staff first greeted Director Dwayne Dantes before answering. He didn't say. Before the staff could finish his sentence, the stout and ruddy Portland Moment walked out of the reception room while combing his white hair. He then pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. "Honorable Miss Audrey, please forgive me for rashly paying a visit." In Lone, after getting to know each other, they greeted noble ladies by their last names and greeted the young ladies by name. "It's my pleasure," Audrey replied politely. Portland Moment was a chancellor who paid more attention to academics. Without any further flattery or pleasantries, he bluntly said with a smile, "This is the thing. I wish to add a mechanical laboratory to our technical university. The goal is to invent and promote various mechanical technologies that aids businesses and daily life. I wonder if you're interested in donating or investing in them." "Haha, Dwayne. How about it? Do you have any thoughts of working together?" "Don't worry, I'll definitely get a grant from the Higher Education Commission." It's a very good idea, but Backlund and the entire kingdom might be falling into a maelstrom afterward. Klein was a little dazed after hearing Principal Moment's words. Audrey nodded slightly and said with a smile, "It sounds interesting, but I need to see more information. This is a responsibility for myself, and my responsibility towards you." "I think so too," Klein added. Portland Moment chortled heartily. "No problem. I'll arrange the information when I get back." In the Fog Sea, on the Golden Dream, Gehrman Sparrow is actually concerned about Anderson's situation. Also, what's the meaning of searching for items related to Vice Admiral Ailment? Many pirates are wildly going after something similar, but they have succeeded. Danitz, who had received Gehrman Sparrow's message, was completely puzzled. But regardless of his puzzlement, he thanked Mr. Fool seriously and carefully. Following that, he put down his fishing rod and turned to enter the cabin, heading straight for the room where Anderson was residing. He knocked on the door and opened it in one fell swoop. With his arms crossed, Danitz stood at the door and said to Anderson, who was composing a portrait, "How is it? How's the digestion of that thing in your stomach?" Anderson put down his brush, glanced at Danitz and replied heavily, "It already knows how to call me Daddy." Danitz subconsciously took 2 steps back. Anderson immediately returned to his relaxed state as he said with a smile, "Just joking. It's not bad. Your captain has ideas and the drive. The only problem is that we've met with failure too many times. The object in my stomach has been isolated. It won't affect me for a long time." As he spoke, he rubbed his belly. Danitz pricked up his brows and curiously asked, "There was originally some sort of effect?" Anderson sized up Danitz a few times. "You should have heard that some Beyonder characteristics or potions will seep into items that are in prolonged contact with them and transform them into sealed artifacts that are difficult to use. However, a human's body is just a relatively special item. At times, I really do suspect that you obtain Beyonder powers through contact with potions and not through consumption. That's why your brain has rotted." In the past, Danitz would definitely be furious, but now all he did was chuckle. In other words, if you don't isolate it, the thing in your stomach will gradually fuse and reconstruct your body, including your brain? Anderson was amused when he heard that. Very good. Continue, don't stop. I think you can attempt to advance to sequence 6. Yes, you're usually very skilled at setting up fires. Danitz replied disdainfully. I'm only lacking in the ingredients. Thinking of Gehrman Sparrow's instructions, he pressed unwillingly. How is the matter supposed to be dealt with after its isolation? Anderson stroked the first button of his shirt as he chuckled. 2 possibilities. 1 is to seek the help of a demigod, such as an unshadowed, allowing the object to seep out bit by bit. In this aspect, your captain knows someone who can do it. The only problem is that my Beyonder characteristic might be purged while purging that object. It will drop my sequence and even turn me into an ordinary person. The second line of thought is to think of a way to obtain the iron-blooded night potion formula. Prepare the corresponding ritual and supplementary ingredients, and see if there's a way to accommodate that object, and use it to become a demigod. That sounds very dangerous. Danitz gave an objective assessment of the second line of thought. Anderson's smile became more obvious. Indeed, this is very dangerous. I don't even know if it will work. But don't you think it's interesting to have such a challenging task? At least, this is more consistent with my aesthetic judgment than the first method. Danitz shook his head seriously and said, No. Following that, he asked in a provocative and probing manner, Don't you have a large inheritance? No wealth? I can bring back your ashes. Anderson wasn't annoyed at all as he solemnly nodded. When the time comes, you can consider eating my ashes directly. Why isn't it possible to provoke this guy at all? The corners of Danitz's mouth twitched as he decided to give up. He wanted to seek the captain and ask how he could obtain items related to Vice Admiral ailment. Late at night, at 160 Buckland Street, just as Klein was about to sleep, he saw Miss Messenger walk out while holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. One of them bit on a thin envelope with a letter stuffed in it. Who's it from? Klein asked out of habit as he extended his hand to receive it. Rionette Tynker's 4 heads spoke one after another. Sharon. Who doesn't like nicknames? Chapter 1041 King's Daughter Sharon. Who doesn't like nicknames? How did she know? She's interacted with Miss Sharon before? Upon hearing Rionette Tynker's answer, Klein was first taken aback before questions emerged one after another in his mind. From his point of view, a messenger and a mailer wouldn't communicate under normal circumstances. The entire process would be the messenger's appearance, the retrieval of the letter, and its departure. Besides, when did Miss Messenger need to obtain the permission of the other party when she gives nicknames? Did Frank Lee and Patrick Bryan agree to it? A few seconds later, Klein instinctively had a guess. Miss Messenger and Miss Sharon definitely had some kind of connection, and Rionette Tynker didn't wish to hide anything. Reining in his thoughts, Klein opened the envelope, unfolded the letter, and quickly scanned the contents. There's something I hope you can help me with. Let's meet at the Bravehearts bar to discuss in detail. Compared to before, Miss Sharon isn't that stingy with her words. She's slightly improved in this aspect for the better. Is this a change that resulted from a demigod advancement? Klein thought for a moment and walked to his desk. Picking up a pen, he wrote, When do you wish to meet? Putting down his pen, he glanced at Rionette Tynker, who was standing by the side, seemingly waiting to write the reply. Klein felt even more certain again. He folded the letter, handed it over, and casually said, For Miss Sharon. One of Rionette Tynker's heads bit on the letter while the remaining 3 said, You haven't paid. No. Postage. Payment. Klein cleared his throat, took out a gold coin, and handed it to Miss Messenger. Seeing Rionette Tynker disappear, he revealed a pensive look as he walked to the reclining chair and waited patiently. Less than a minute later, Miss Messenger walked out of the void again in her complicated dress. She was biting the letter from before. Klein didn't inquire as he received the reply letter and unfolded it. If you don't have any problems with it, it would be best if it happens tonight. Tonight. Klein nodded thoughtfully and flicked his wrist, causing the letter to ignite into scarlet flames, quickly turning it black. The flame burgeoned and enveloped his body as well. By the time the flames extinguished, Klein's figure had already disappeared from the reclining chair. The floating ashes hovering in midair automatically fell into a nearby trash can with the help of an invisible wind. In the houses that were connected together in Backland's North Borough, Sherwood Borough, and the bridge area, the wall gas lamps brightened slightly before returning to normal. Before long, Klein appeared in a room he had privately rented at the periphery of East Borough. He changed his clothes, put on gold-rimmed glasses, and went out with the appearance of Sherlock Moriarty, heading straight for the Bravehearts bar. This time, he didn't seek out Ian, who was in the card room playing tabletop games with a bunch of people. He listened for a few seconds before pushing open the door to one of the billiard rooms, and entered slowly. Just as he flipped open the door, he saw figures outlining themselves on two sides. Sitting on a high stool to the left was the blonde, blue-eyed Sharon. She was wearing an exquisite bonnet and a regal dress. Compared to the past, her face was no longer as pale as before. It just looked like she was anemic, making her look less like a female ghost and more like a doll. Standing to the right of the billiard table was Marie. This young man who liked to play cards with zombies had turned increasingly pale. The malice in his eyes had become unobvious, but it gave a suppressive feeling to others. "Good evening." Klein took off his hat with a smile and bowed. "Good evening, Mr. Detective." Sharon's body seemed to float up weightlessly as she seriously bowed. Marie did the same. At that moment, the billiard room seemed to be filled with paranormal events. Klein casually pulled a high stool chair and sat down. He chuckled and said, "What is it this time?" "I'm very sorry to trouble you again." Sharon bowed again. Marie quickly said, "We made an agreement for a cooperative effort with the Sanguine to deal with the key members of the Rose School of Thought in Backland. We will definitely carry out the bulk of it ourselves. It will include how we lure them out, how we ambush them, and how our attack will happen. We just hope that you will watch the entire process by the side and aid in our escape when an accident happens. If you want anything, just mention it. We can discuss it. That is to say, I'm a contingency to prevent any accidents. What if that fellow, Emlyn, also enlists the world to secretly help? When that happens, they would have two demigods in their contingency plans. I think it might work. I can be Sherlock Moriarty while letting Kona's Kilgore be Gehrman's Sparrow." Klein considered for a few seconds without immediately agreeing. Instead, he said, "Let me ask a few questions." Marie glanced at Sharon and nodded. "Okay." Klein looked at Sharon, who was sitting on a high stool like a doll. "The Tutensis 2 mummy we previously obtained was a preparation for you to advance to Sequence 4 puppet. And you've already become a demigod?" This was something he had previously learned from their conversations and letter exchanges. His main goal was to make a confirmation and start the subsequent topic. Sharon quietly looked back at him as she said with an ethereal and inhuman voice, "Yes." Klein nodded slightly and directly asked, "What's your relationship with Rionette Tynker?" Sharon's blue eyes darted about almost indissemblably as she said, "She is my teacher." "Teacher?" Although Klein already had some guesses, he nearly drew a gasp. He felt his head aching. In the blink of an eye, although his expression remained the same, countless thoughts were bubbling in his mind. Miss Messenger was originally an angel? I'm actually using an angel as a messenger? Isn't that too exaggerated? She is even Miss Sharon's teacher. It probably wasn't that simple when she requested to be my messenger. From the looks of it, she definitely isn't on the same side as the Mother Tree of Desire. Miss Messenger signed the contract with me because the Mother Tree of Desire was coveting me? No, that she is bound to be my enemy? It's no wonder Miss Sharon was able to obtain the puppet potion formula and the corresponding ingredients with the help of her teacher. As his thoughts raced, Klein decided to ask another question. He wanted to use the process of Miss Sharon's or Marie's replies to calm his emotions. He deliberated and said, "What's the exact situation?" This time it was still Sharon replying. Compared to Hormic's mechanical dolls, she appeared more lifeless as she calmly said, "Early in the 5th epoch, death perished. There was resistance stirring against the Balam Empire in places like the southern continent's Star Highlands and Paz Valley. During this process, the chained god appeared, and the Rose School of Thought was born. My teacher was originally the daughter of the ruler of the local highlands, but she later became the blessed of the chained god, assisting her father in establishing the Highlands Kingdom. Later on, she became a Sequence 2 angel, one of the leaders of the Rose School of Thought. She advocated temperance and using austere and few desires to resist the madness in life. About 922 years ago, the son of God, Sua, was born. Everything began to change as the indulgence and bloody rituals gradually took over the dominating faction. At first, teacher was barely able to maintain it, preventing the temperance faction from being affected. However, as time passed, the influence of the mother tree of desire grew. Sua also successfully advanced a few years ago, becoming a true abomination. An internal war broke out. Teacher protected us as we escaped from the highlands, valley, and grasslands. I watched her fall under the siege of Sua and the other high-ranking members. However, she didn't completely die because of prior preparations. She resurrected in a special state in the spirit world, and now yearns to complete her body. Is that so? In other words, Miss Messenger is currently, in essence, an angel without the corresponding powers. She is in a weakened state. It's no wonder she wasn't able to easily deal with the Rose School of Thought demigod, Shanks. Wait, although there are many angels cooperating with me, why are they all incomplete or weak? Apart from Mam Ariana, all of them are in such states. Mr. Azek, Palaz Zorost, will accept in Miss Messenger. Is there a problem with my title as the Fool? Are they all waiting for me to give them the charms corresponding to Scholar of Yore? Klein came to a realization as he felt rather poignant. He didn't ask why Rionette Tinker still desired money, as he thought for a moment before saying, Miss Sharon, the Rose School of Thought definitely has no lack of the puppet potion formula. After you obtain the Tutensis II mummy, they would likely view you as a demigod. In addition, Mam Rionette Tinker had once appeared before the Rose School of Thought's demigod, and engaged in a battle with them. This also means that the Rose School of Thought definitely knows that she is alive, and they wouldn't not be prepared against her. And your relationship as master and disciple with her is no secret to them. In such a situation, isn't it a little too naive to use yourself and Marie as bait to fish out the key members of the Rose School of Thought in Backland? Do you think they will only send 1 or 2 demigods to deal with you? Up to what degree of help can the Sanguine provide? Also, I previously mentioned that due to one of my identities, the Mother Tree of Desire places a great deal of importance on me. Even Abomination Sua was sent to attack me. And your teacher's cooperation with me is something they are similarly aware of. Summarizing all these points, if you and Marie appear, the kind of assault you would invite is unpredictable. Having said that, Klein's expression turned serious as he asked, Do you wish to cause a divine descent in Backland? The entire billiard room instantly turned abnormally quiet, but there weren't any changes to Sharon's expression. You're tuning in to the Limay's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.